All right. Good evening. Rahul Kumar, can you please relax for a few minutes? What is the urgency? भाई साहब, इतना स्पैम तो आईटी सेल के लोग भी नहीं करते. All right. Okay. Good evening. By the former Nimra. Okay, good evening. We'll start with center-state relations and federalism. As briefly explained to you, this is going to be a topic which is going to be based on layer 2, and then we'll extract relevant information from layer 2 as far as layer 1 is concerned. Okay, so we're now going to go to the theme center-state relations. This theme is dominant in the mains exam, and very rarely do you see questions from here in the pre. The primary reason from questions not coming from here in the pre is because of the nature of technicality and often certain areas which are grey in nature, right? Now, layer 1 here, which is conceptual and factual and therefore important for the pre. We need to know the basics of legislative, administrative and financial relations between the center and the states. Nothing too technical on that front. And 2, we must also know the basics of what is called an emergency. Once we've understood both of these things in nature, then comes layer 2, which is analytical in nature, therefore important for the mains. And the real stuff really starts happening here, where we first understand theoretical questions on federalism. We understand what is it, how is the center stronger than the states, how is the states stronger than the center. We understand the formats of federalism, which is cooperative, collaborative, competitive, so on and so forth. What measures have been taken to further strengthen federalism in the country, certain basic agencies in and around it, and that's pretty much it. Once we've understood this, we will of course then move to certain special states, such as statehood of Delhi, statehood of Tripura, of Pondicherry, certain special provisions for the northeastern states, and how do they largely play out. Once we are sort of done with this, we will of course be looking at an overall review of how center-state relations can be made better. There are going to be some recommendations that we're going to be merging into center-state relations. Now, when we do study emergency and its review, we will go back to our theme on the president, because the president is the one who promulgates emergency in the country. Okay, now let us start, let's continue, and once we are done with this, we'll move to local self-government. Once we're done with local self-government, we will quickly move to bodies. This is a very simple topic and should not take a lot of your time, right? So let's start with this, and we'll start with the base. Our base is going to be layer 2, and we're going to be building layer 1 on layer 2. For those of you who have access to the notes, which you can download from the Google Drive that I've already shared with you, you will find mains syllabus 2, which I have also massively updated since developments over the last year. So we're going to start with this and focus on what is relevant. If you see the syllabus, it very clearly says functions and responsibilities of the union and states, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure, devolution of powers and finances up to the local level. So if you see center-state relations and local self-government in the mains exam are actually a part of the single unit of the mains syllabus. If you see the kind of questions that are asked, you will understand the mechanism behind it and the reasons behind this. So first, you will see a question from 2013 which says, recent directives from the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas are perceived by the Nagas, which is Nagaland, as a threat to override the exceptional status enjoyed by the state, discussed in light of Article 371A of the Indian Constitution. Even if you don't know anything about it, if you just take an educated guess, and you'll be able to understand that the Petroleum and Natural Gas Ministry is primarily responsible for exploration and mining of petroleum and natural gas. And what could perhaps be the special status of Nagaland is that you would require local consent before any such activity is taken care of by the ministry. So, and that exceptional status is guaranteed under 371A. This is a special states question, massively in the news in 2013, which is why it was asked in the paper. Then again in 2013, there was another question that we've already covered from the territory point of view in our very second theme itself. Many state governments further bifurcate geographical administrative areas like districts and talukas for better governance. In light of the above, can it also be justified that more number of smaller states would actually bring in effective governance at the state level? This question, the second question in 2013, is asked in the context of the Telangana Andhra Pradesh bifurcation, which was massively heated around the same time. And of course, we've covered big states versus small states theoretically in our Union and Territory chapter. 2013 again, constitutional mechanisms to resolve interstate water disputes have failed to address and solve the problems. Is the failure due to structural or process inadequacy, or both? This, of course, is the Karnataka water dispute, which had again caused several local law and order problems, destructions to property in the southern part of the country. Right now, you would notice that specific water disputes are not asked in the exam. What is asked on the contrary, what is asked instead is the larger issue of interstate water disputes. Now, you will find dedicated notes of this in the old folder, not in the new one, because there is nothing new that has happened here over the last year and a half. So you'll find them in the second part of the old folder in the drive. I'll refer the same in due course if the need may be. The question is a very simple one. Is there a problem with the composition, or is there a problem with the way interstate water tribunals go about solving interstate water disputes? In 2013, discussed the recommendations of the 13th Finance Commission, which have been a departure from the previous commissions for strengthening local government finances. Very, very interesting question, because this year in 2021, out of nowhere, they asked the 14th Finance Commission, where most of us are concerned about is actually the 15th Finance Commission. So Finance Commission impact on center state needs to be done. Then in 2014 is a standard theory question that no doubt the federal principle is dominant in our constitution, and that principle is one of its basic features. But it is equally true that federalism under the Indian constitution leans in favor of a strong center, a feature that militates against the concept of a strong federalism. This question in a rather simplified form means that no doubt India has center state governments, but in reality it is the center stronger than the states. Explain with the right amount of examples. That was the question. Very theory, very basic. 2015, the era of Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog starts building this brand around cooperative federalism. So you get a question on cooperative federalism in 2015. The concept of cooperative federalism has been increasingly emphasized in the recent years. Highlight the drawback in the existing structure and the extent to which cooperative federalism would answer the shortcomings. Thank you, Saurabh. So the question is basically, what are the challenges of cooperative federalism and the reasons behind? And the reason I'm wearing a jacket, by the way, is because I was eating food and have spilled dal all over my sweater or pullover. So I'm hiding the stains of my aloo gobi and my dal. So pardon me if I start sweating, but such is such. Now, 2015, the last question, of course, was on general issues with local self-government, that in the absence of a well-educated and a well-organized local self-government, they've become mostly political tools and not effective tools of governance. So what are your problems pertaining to education, organization, and governance with respect to local self-government? Right? Then in 2016, that's when the Delhi center issues start cropping up. New government comes to Delhi from a year before. So discuss the essentials of the 69th Amendment and anomalies, which means any issues with it, and that have led to the recent reported conflicts between the elected representatives and the institution of the Lieutenant Governor in the administration of Delhi. Do you think it will give rise to a trend in the functioning of Indian federal politics? This is when there is an issue of whether the Lieutenant Governor is bound by the advice of the Delhi CM. There will be a follow-up question to this in 2018, that here there was an issue as to who is the legitimate authority. The Supreme Court in 2018 gave a judgment that the Delhi government, that the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi is bound by the Chief Minister of Delhi and therefore must abide by the council advice rendered. So what impact will that judgment have, was a follow-up question. In 2021, though there was no question on Delhi, but two developments happened. One development was with respect to an amendment to the Gnctd Act, the Government of the National Capital Territory of Delhi Act, which basically says a symbolic amendment which, if implemented in the wrong way, can rub the Delhi government in a very, very wrong way, is that the amendment says the government of Delhi therefore means the Lieutenant Governor, which could be a contradiction to the interpretation of the Supreme Court's judgment. The other thing that actually happened, which we will discuss in the course of this discussion, is with respect to Pondicherry and developments that happened in Pondicherry with the role of the Lieutenant Governor there, who was, of course, Kiran Bedi for a long time, was replaced recently. Now, Kiran Bedi in that context had appointed some people without the consultation of the Council of Ministers, which of course became a larger issue to sort of deal with, right? Now, in that, there is a case which is still pending in the Supreme Court as to whether that was right or wrong. And the Supreme Court, if decides that the Lieutenant Governor of Pondicherry is bound by the advice of the ministers of Pondicherry, it will also have a correlative impact on Delhi. Now, 2016 is pre-370, where debates had sort of heated up. Basically, to what extent is 370 of the Constitution bearing a marginal note temporary provision with respect to the state of J&K temporary? Discuss the future prospects of this provision in the context of Indian polity. This is largely a question which was asked before the abrogation of 370, and a question which was, what is 370? How temporary is it? Can it be removed? If so, how? So just giving the legal possibilities out of it. 2016 was a constitutional history question. Does the Government of India Act 1935 lay down a federal constitution? In your drive, in the mains folder, new updated folder, I have already given you a 2 to 3 page document on the basic provisions of the Government of India Act 1935 and how much of those have really been implemented in India in its context today. 2017 was a more generalized question of the 2015 local self-government question. The local self-government in India has not proven to be an effective instrument of governance. Critically examine the statement and give your views to improve the situation. This is a more generalized question to that was asked before. 2017, which was a follow-up to the GST year of 2016, because the amendment was passed much later. Standard, straightforward question. Explain the salient features of the Constitution. 101st Amendment, which is GST. Do you think it is good enough to remove the cascading effect, which means the multiplicity effect of taxes, and provide for a common national market for goods and services? 2018 is a follow-up to the Delhi issue. 2018 again was again a larger question on panchayats and finances, because your syllabus says devolution of powers and finances up to the local level. So assess the importance of the panchayati system in India, and as a part of local government. Apart from government grants, what sources the panchayats can look out for as far as financing developmental projects is concerned. Okay, now 2019, distribution of legislative powers in context. Principle of federal supremacy is nothing but center stronger than the states. Harmonious construction is if there's a conflict between the center and the state list, how could you, without affecting each other's interests, make it all better. 2020 was, do you think cooperation, competition and confrontation have shaped federalism in India? Add the right amount of examples, which is a standard current affairs question. Then, of course, in COVID, apply epidemic diseases, disaster management and farm laws to federalism. In 2021, they wanted you to apply the CBI jurisdiction to federalism. And then, of course, the question on local self-government. The strength and sustenance of local institutions have now moved from functions, functionaries and funds, which is basically, do you have people, do you have money, do you have power, to are you really relevant in the contemporary times? These are the questions. So what is your basic analysis? Your analysis is that you've got to prepare theory questions in a lot of detail with a lot of examples. 2, you have to prepare state issues which are in the news over the last 6 to 8 months. But these 6 to 8 months, they have to be prepared in a very generic format. You don't need a lot of technical detail. One editorial and one explained column is more than enough for this. Because if you see the question on Nagaland, if you see the question on 370, it's not a complicated question. It's a very simple question. Is it temporary? If not, why? If yes, why? It's not a complicated question. Even this year, the CBI question was, what is the jurisdiction for CBI? How is it affecting federalism? How could we balance it? That's it. There's nothing more than this that has been asked in the exam from state-specific issues. And of course, you need an overall analysis and an evaluation of local self-government. And on the basis of all of this, you should be able to prepare your answers better. Emergency, we will look at president. There's been one question on emergency in the mains, which is the impact of financial emergency and the reasons thereof. We'll of course cover it in the right amount of time, in the right amount of context. I hope all of you guys have eaten well, have relaxed well, have rested well. Today is going to be a little bit of a marathon class. Our objective is to finish substantive portions of polity in the right amount of detail. Okay, so let us start. So we'll first prepare our theory on federalism. Let's start by understanding what is it. You will see a lot of questions that come in the pre from its essential features. So what is federalism? Federalism is nothing but a form of government where the sovereign authority is divided between the center and the states. It is essentially where there are 2 layers of government, and the center and the states work in their own spheres without really overlapping into each other's zones, right? Without really overlapping into each other's zones. Is the video stuck? Is the video stuck? No, it's not. All right. Okay. So that's the basic understanding and definition of federalism. We'll continue. So what are the essential features of federalism? It is not, right? Okay. So what are the basic and the essential features of federalism? First, for two layers of government to exist, there must be two authorities or two sources of power, wherein usually the powers with respect to national importance are entrusted with the center, whereas local matters are of course entrusted with the state. So usually matters of defense, communication, foreign policy, they are left with the center, whereas local powers such as education, land, agriculture, they're usually left with the states. Now, this is like the parent having two children, right? Two children, child one and child two. The parent has to absolutely be impartial. The children can't decide who is more superior. In the same way, if in the country there are two layers of government, the center and the states, to make sure that the powers are distributed in a fair manner and to make sure that there is a clear demarcation of functions, in such a scenario, you will require the constitution of the country to be supreme. If the constitution is not supreme, if you don't have a written constitution, if you are an unwritten constitution, which means you have multiple laws which are granted the status of a constitution, you don't have a single written document per se, it will be very difficult to trace that one source which says, all right, according to X, center can do A and states can do B. For that to happen, A, the constitution should be above everything else, and two, it should be written in one single place so that there is no confusion, no overreach, any of those things. And this distribution of powers must be protected by a higher majority, which could be needed by the parliament involving state ratifications to change this, which is why you would require 368 with state ratification to change any center state distributions. If you don't do this, then the parliament may have an upper hand, which the parliament represents the center to be as it is, and therefore the center can easily start taking powers in their own hands for their own benefit. And in case there is a conflict between the center and the states, it is extremely important to resolve the conflict. You require an independent judiciary to look at it from an impartial manner. And this was asked in the prelims very recently, where they asked you which of the following is an essential feature of federalism in the country. The correct answer was, among the given options, independence of judiciary. So you can do that by making sure that in case there is a conflict, the judiciary is able to decide where should the power lie. If the center tries to encroach on the powers of the states, or if the state tries to encroach on the powers of the center, it is the judiciary that can take a call, which is also one of the fundamental arguments against farm laws, which is why farm laws were challenged in the High Court, to which the High Court put a stay on them. And by the time challenged in the Supreme Court, and by the time the Supreme Court could decide the matter, the government repealed those farm laws in the first place. So the matter becomes infructuous. But this is a real-time example of why an independent judiciary is extremely important, right? Now, let's understand what makes India center stronger than the states. What are your basic features that we've discussed already? And what are the several laws that allow you to do what you do, right? So first things first, the very idea of an emergency. Emergency is often misunderstood to have just an impact on the rights of citizens. In fact, only one kind of emergency does. And it does not necessarily mean there's going to be an absolute impact on the right of citizens. However, in its essence, What emergency is really about, what it is really upholding, is nothing but the center for an extraordinary nature of circumstances, deciding things for the states. It's nothing but a power consolidation exercise. It's an unnatural state of events. It is an extremely surprising state of events where the normal center-state relations have to be distorted and the center has to be given more powers than the states, which you will understand in the context of an emergency when we will tell you how in the national emergency the center can also make laws on the state list, and how in the state, in a presidential rule, which is also what is called state emergency, the president and the governor on behalf of each other can literally make laws and dissolve a state legislature in the first place. We'll get into the details of it in a fair bit. And the fact that you have an integrated judiciary, which means right from the lowest court to the topmost court, you have a straight up access. The judgments of the Supreme Court are final and binding on all lower courts. These lower courts are within the jurisdictions of the state. The state is appointing the judges of these lower courts. The states also can have local laws for these lower courts, but all of these can be challenged in the court of the Supreme Court, and all of these are also bound by judgments of the Supreme Court. So an integrated judiciary, an independent judiciary, by definition makes you a center stronger than the states. Not only this, the fact that when you look at the Finance Commission deciding how tax distribution of divisible taxes, taxes which have to be divided between the center and the states, how much should the center keep and how much should be given to the states. The fact that the Finance Commission is in fact appointed entirely by the center, in fact by the president, and has a chairperson and 4 other members who are also completely appointed by the president. And the state governments have absolutely no role in the appointment of members to the Finance Commission, automatically makes the center stronger than the states. With respect to the concurrent list, when you see that there is a conflict between a subject which is in the concurrent list, say education, the center can make laws on education, and so can the states. But in case of a conflict, the center can overrule the states to that effect, right? And of course, in case something is not mentioned in either of the lists of the 7 schedule, which is the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list, which we will study in detail when we do legislative relations, we will understand that if nothing is mentioned in either of the 3 lists, then it is assumed that the center will have those powers as residual in nature. The fact that the Constitution is flexible enough where several amendments to the Constitution can be made under 368 that do not require state ratifications. The fact that territorial changes can happen to the Constitution and to the states without any involvement of the states, and in fact with a simple majority, show how center is in fact stronger than the states. The fact that we studied this in respect to the president and the governor, that the governor can literally reserve any bill that the governor feels is important enough to be assented by the president. This in fact is a constitutional discretion which has been given to the governor to ensure that the best interest of the country is taken care of in a good way, and the governor can then send off the bill to the president for his or her examination. And the fact that this can happen, the fact that a bill which is passed by a state legislature can be ratified by the president, is nothing but the center stronger than the states. The fact that the governor himself or herself is appointed by the center on the advice of the Council of Ministers is also an application of center stronger than the states. And the parliament, under extraordinary circumstances, in fact can make a law over a state list, for example to implement an international agreement, to upon the request of the states, and of course on an approval resolution by the Rajya Sabha in national interest. There are certain balancing provisions for all of these, but the Rajya Sabha or otherwise the parliament at the end of the day, with certain conditions, does have the power to make laws on the state list over and above your emergency provisions. We've discussed this in the previous slide. I've just given you article numbers. The fact that we have a dual polity, supremacy of the constitution, a written constitution, rigidity of it, and the independent judiciary makes us understand that these are why the states are also given some amount of respect. The fact that you have clear distribution of powers under Article 1 and Article 246 to be more clear. The fact that Article 1 very clearly defines the states. The fact that the Constitution is supreme and nothing can violate the Constitution, more specifically the fundamental rights. The fact that 368 gives the powers to the states to ratify those kind of amendments which affect states. The fact that a higher majority is required for certain kind of constitutional amendments. The fact that the judiciary is largely self-appointed, especially the higher judiciary, does make sure that center and states are in fact two separate entities, right? And most recently, we've seen the Farm Acts, the Disaster Management Acts, and the Epidemics Act, which of course have really had an impact on federalism. Okay, so these are our broad understandings on the matter. We now continue with the rest. If we have to clearly identify how the center is stronger than the states, these are a few examples: legislatively, financially, and of course executively. These are important for the pre and the mains, just giving you a little bit of an understanding. We've already done a lot of this before, just giving you articles here. So for example, thank you, Sarnima. Thank you. It's very kind of you. So first, Article 248, which confers residuary power. Explain to you what residuary power is. If it's not mentioned in either of the lists of the 7th schedule, it's assumed that the power would lie with the parliament. The fact that under 249, post the Rajya Sabha, the parliament is empowered to make laws in list 2 if necessary in national interest. This is supported by a Rajya Sabha resolution through a special majority 1. We've discussed this in multiple classes before. This is special majority 1. Sorry. The power of the parliament to also to legislate on a matter in the state list if there is, of course, a proclamation of emergency under 249, which is usually with respect to state legislatures. The parliament can also make laws if 2 or more states request the parliament for the same under 252, and the law continues to be in operation as long as those 2 states want it. Then, of course, if you have ratified an international document, and I've taught you the meaning of ratification, it means that there will be a legal effect needed to implement that international document. And if such is the case, then, and even if it violates something in the state list, the parliament is competent and empowered enough in order to implement an international document, because foreign policy is in the union list. The decision to do that is with the center, and the center wants to do that. Even if it transgresses on state lines, it is perfectly all right. It is perfectly doable. And in case there is a conflict in center state, the power will lie with the parliament. And of course, there are certain sanctions required under 304 with respect to presidential recommendations before introducing certain bills in the state legislature. Okay. Now, when we look at financial relations largely depend upon the center for financial assistance to grants and aid. This is usually how it works in the sense that your finance commission, your other developmental grants, they usually run from the center to the states. Apart from this, when we look at it from a tax point of view, see, there are essentially 2 layers to tax. And please don't do the technical details to tax. Nobody in the exam asks you. In polity, in fact, in other subjects also. So there's somebody who decides to impose the tax, which is usually the center or the states. There's somebody who collects the tax. And then, of course, there's somebody who takes the money from the tax. That's called appropriation of tax. So you've got imposition, collection, and appropriation. any combination of center and states is possible, and usually how it is appropriated is either the tax is entirely for the center or for the states or for the center and the states, right? So you have direct taxes, indirect taxes, distributive taxes, and so on and so forth. But the general understanding is the center has far more substantial taxation powers than the states. In fact, if you look at some of the heavy tax weights, such as income tax, wealth tax, excise duty, they're all collected, in fact, and appropriated by the center. Not only this, there has been a debate in the country for the last 2-3 years that alcohol, which is in the state list, should be bought under the purview of GST, and the states are objecting to this because this may affect a very large chunk of your revenue, as alcohol does generate a substantial revenue. Now, when we look at administrative or executive relations, this is where things get again repetitive but sort of important. First is 256. You have to make sure that the states are complying with any orders made by the parliament, in the sense that if the parliament has made a law, and to implement a law certain executive orders have to be issued, the states have to comply with those orders, because the law has to be implemented all through the country. The parliament can't say that, boss, you've made a law, we're not going to help you with the implementation of it because it's our state. That's not how it works. Second, it also talks about the control of the Union of States, where the states will have to listen to certain executive directions. Like, for example, in the case of military, in the case of communication, in the case of essential infrastructure, such as, say, railways. If the states have to allot certain land so that a railway track or a railway station can be built, the states will have to do so. If certain areas have to be given for military cantonments, then of course the states will have to provide for the same. The states can't say that we don't have land for military cantonments anymore. That's also very, very important. It also is true that under Article 356, the President can hold that the governance must be carried out in accordance with the Constitution. If there is a failure of constitutional values, the President, of course, on the advice of the Cabinet, which we will come to, has the powers to impose a presidential emergency or a presidential rule. The very fact that All India services exist with a constitutional protection under 312 make sure that the All India services serve the President and serve the center and the states in a way that it has been recruited by the center and constitutionally protected also. The territorial provisions and the implementations of it, the appointment of the governor, the emergency provisions, the fact that your freedom of trade and commerce is looked at as one comprehensive economic unit, that's also fine. Like, for example, when we look at 304, we were talking about it. So the states are making a laws which affect interstate trade and commerce, then a presidential recommendation is required in that specific state. The fact that you have a uniform citizenship, and the fact that, of course, you have an integrated and a uniform judicial system are things that further exemplify executive or administrative relations. ये अगर एग्जाम में आएगा तो 5-5 पॉइंट 4-4 पॉइंट लिखना पड़ेगा as it is. ठीक है. Now, the Supreme Court has always held a very, very clear view on this. The Supreme Court in the Ram Javaya Kapoor case held that the separation of power doctrine is not incorporated in India in its strictest form. And in State of Bengal versus Union of India, the Supreme Court has said, we are not truly federal because the center enjoys more powers than the states. In State of Haryana versus Union of India, the Supreme Court said that we are a semi-federal system. In Kuldeep Nayyar's case, it said that no doubt it is a dominant one, but it is true that federalism in India has a very, very strong center. For those of you who have political science as an optional, you may want to quote Austin and Birch, where it has been said that the Indian federal system is a very, very unique system, which is why we often use the word sui generis, which is of its own kind or of its own unique form. Indian federal system is in fact fairly unique in nature, right? So Austin and Birch in fact did use the word cooperative federalism, where they must work together. Dicey said that federalism has been excessively watered down in India so that it serves the conditions of India. We studied the four fundamental reasons of India being India: the fact that we have a colonial past, the fact that it's an involuntary form of federalism, the fact that we have great socio-economically compromised indicators, and the fact that we have a hugely diverse quotient. For those reasons, we've chosen to be a certain way, and a quasi-federal state is who we decide to be. And Ambedkar, of course, has often said both federalism and unitary depend on situations and circumstances. And you must very clearly remember, as far as the prelims is concerned, that the word federalism is not mentioned anywhere in the constitution. The word federalism is not mentioned anywhere at all in the constitution. ठीक है, तो ये थोड़ा सा इंपॉर्टेंट था, ये आपको समझना चाहिए था. ठीक है, क्लियर है? ये मेंस के लिए है, ये भी मेंस के लिए है. फेडरलिज्म नॉट इम्पॉर्टेंट, नॉट मेंशन्ड इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, इज फॉर द प्री. तो अगर हम एक बेसिक चीज समझें कि भाई हम ऐसे क्यों हैं, इट इज बिकॉज वी वर एट the stages of development, the stage of progress that we were in, we needed a strong center to maintain the kind of unity that we needed, given the fact that our population was so heterogeneous, was so different, was so diverse, and we needed a uniform policy with the right amount of diversity to ensure the specific needs of our people. And unlike US, where the states create the center, in India the center creates the states, and therefore it is right to say that India is neither purely federal nor unitary. In fact, it is a union of composite states, which and in a scenario where neither the parliament nor the states are sovereign, because what is truly sovereign, where there is true power, is the constitution. And of course, you are federal, but you also have unique features enforcing national unity and growth. So if you get a mains question that says, is India center stronger than the states? These 5-6 slides are your answers for the same. Thanks, Pankaj. Now we look at it from the subcomponents of federalism, right? Now the subcomponents of federalism are also fairly interesting. We're going to talk about asymmetrical federalism. Symmetrical federalism is basically saying everything is equal across the center and the states enjoy equal powers. That's not the case. What we're talking about is asymmetrical federalism, where the center and the states have different power functions and power matrices. It's to be understood as unequal distribution of power between the constituting units of a country, which is center and states. And in India, we have two forms of asymmetry. We've got vertical asymmetry and we've got horizontal asymmetry. So vertical asymmetry means the distribution of powers is unequal between the center and the states. And second, it is unequal amongst the states also. All states don't have equal power. Some states have more, some states have a larger say. So let's spend some time on vertical symmetry. You just need to know very, very clearly, thank you Sambat, very, very clearly what is it, how do we make it vertical symmetry. Because vertical symmetry is, again, it's just another fancy word for center stronger than the states. It is that India is stronger than the states. अभी हमने ज्ञान दिया है कि बॉस यूनियन इज इंडेस्ट्रक्टेबल, स्टेट्स आर डिस्ट्रक्टेबल, यूनियन टेरिटरी को आप क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, इमरजेंसी प्रोविजंस है, इक्वल अमेंडमेंट, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट्स में इक्वल से नहीं है, सेंटर हैज मोर लेजिस्लेटिव, फाइनेंशियल एंड एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर्स. द सेम ज्ञान, what I'm trying to tell you is the gyan that we have for center stronger than the states or unitary federalism is the exact same gyan for vertical asymmetry. एग्जाम में आएगा, सेम चीज लिखेगा, नंबर लेगा, घर जाएगा, मेरे को याद करेगा, बस. The tough part of polity was over long time ago. This is very simple and very, very application based. Okay. Now, it is horizontal symmetry, which is slightly different. Matlab amongst the states and union territories and amongst union territories. तो देखते हैं कैसे among the states क्यों? All states are not equal. Some are more equal than the other. You could look at it as an application of equal protection of law. But let's understand why are they unequal. They're unequal primarily because of local, historical, and geographical contexts. That's geographical contexts. Let's understand why. So first, unlike the US, where every state has the same number of seats to the US Senate, in India, the number of seats a state has to the Rajya Sabha depends on the population of the state, which is why Uttar Pradesh has the largest number of seats to the Rajya Sabha, because the population of Uttar Pradesh makes it so, which is why Uttar Pradesh's representation to the Rajya Sabha gives Uttar Pradesh more influence in central policy making than perhaps an Arunachal Pradesh or an Assam or even Andhra for that matter. Apart from this, there are also certain states which have been specially empowered under 371 A, B, C, D, E, F, G, where the governor gets to make certain administrative and policy decisions in the interest of some regions of that state. I'll quickly list a few down for you. So for example, 371 is for Maharashtra, wherein specific development boards for Maharashtra and Gujarat. The governors of Maharashtra and Gujarat can create special welfare agencies for Vidarbha Marathwada region. Similarly in Gujarat also for the Saurashtra and Kutch region. These are also where a lot of times state demands keep cropping up. 371A, Nagaland, which was in the mains, the first question in 2013, is that any law which is made by the parliament in relation to Naga customary law and procedure, well, marriage, adoption, property, resources, including civil and criminal justice matters, and ownership or transfer of land resources, will only apply to Nagaland if the Assembly of Nagaland agrees or decides to do so. This is basically like a similar version to 370, but 370 was temporary and this was permanent. Okay, and further, of course, the governor of Nagaland has a special responsibility where it can declare certain areas as disturbed areas, where central forces can have heightened civil or they can have heightened criminal jurisdictions. 371B is for Assam, wherein a committee of legislators from the tribal areas are specially made to look after their interest, and this later on led to the bifurcation of the state of Meghalaya, which is why you would have often heard of the Assam-Meghalaya border disputes also, which were in the news last year. Will not be relevant for you next year, so don't worry about them too much. Unnecessary memory ko stress mat do. Right now, there are several other examples that I've listed down for you in the next page. We will look at them also. 371C DV आगे तो देखिए Manipur. 371C hilly areas of Manipur also are supposed to have a committee of legislators. They assist the governor also. The governor has to make an annual report to the president on how the hilly areas in Manipur are being governed, and the center can give directions to the state as far as these areas are concerned. Some of you may remember the 6th schedule, which was an exemption to the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, wherein in the 6th schedule, the 6th schedule contains provisions for administration of tribal areas in the 4 AMTM states, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. Remember, हमें बस means में sprinkle करना है. टेक्निकल डिटेल पढ़ के पता नहीं कहाँ लेके जाओगे, बस स्प्रिंकल करना है. आसाम, मेघालय, त्रिपुरा एंड मिजोरम. यहाँ पे क्या होता है, ऑटोनोमस डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स बनते हैं, ऑटोनोमस रीजन्स बनते हैं. यहाँ पे पंचायती राज नहीं लग सकता, पीसा नहीं लग सकता. लास्ट ईयर दे ट्राइड टू मेक अ लॉ अराउंड इट, व्हिच इज व्हाई देयर वाज अ ह्यूज कंट्रोवर्सी दैट हाउ डेयर यू अप्लाई पीसा टू दीज ट्राइबल रीजन्स वेयर यू ऑलरेडी हैव लोकल डिस्ट्रिक्ट ऑटोनोमस councils. है ना? So these councils can make laws with respect to allotment, occupation of land, management of resources, social customs, divorce, property, etc. In fact, in Assam, the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, the Dima Hasao Autonomous District Council, all of them have been developed. Ladakh, maybe there's a Ladakh Development Council for Leh and Kargil. This has to now be further restructured post 370. And there is also the Gorkhaland Hill Council in West Bengal over and above the 6th schedule. So there have been special provisions that have been created where special powers have to be given. These states can have heightened local sub-governance units over and above their local self-government. Okay. Now, apart from this, among the union territories also, all union territories are not equal. Firstly, only Delhi and Pondicherry have legislatures. Now J&K is also supposed to have more legislatures. Hence the delimitation exercise was also in the news. Now other territories don't do that. Even in Pondicherry and Delhi. By the way, through a law, Pondicherry and J&K union territories are going to have the exact same legislative powers, which are going to be higher than Delhi. As you would know, land, police and law and order are not under Delhi's jurisdiction. They're under the central government's jurisdiction. And between Delhi and Pondicherry or Delhi, Pondicherry and J&K, there's a notable difference, as of course Delhi has powers like any other state, but Pondicherry has powers like any other state in the state list and the concurrent list, where Delhi does not in terms of police, land, law and order, police, land and public order, right? However, the parliament does have overriding laws over any law made by the assembly in the union territories. That's how the amendments were being made. Pondicherry, very interestingly, and we'll come to that in a while. What is very extremely interesting about Pondicherry is, you may remember we studied enclaves in the context of the land boundary agreement when we studied territory. Pondicherry is an enclaved union territory, which means the union territory of Pondicherry is actually with 4 different land regions across different states. So though it's a single administrative unit, but the land is really not connected. It is non-contiguous in nature. So we'll study this in a while. So Karaikal region in Tamil Nadu, Yanam in Andhra Pradesh, and Mahe, of course, in Kerala. And that is why Pondicherry also is one of those unique union territories, which I will tell you in just a bit, also has a 4-language formula. No other state has a 4-language formula. Pondicherry does. Okay. All of this information you don't get in the books easily. You read further resources, so you'll be able to understand. Now the question is, why is asymmetric federalism important? See, asymmetric federalism is excruciatingly important because it helps you preserve diversity while ensuring unity. Second, you're able to take care of the local issues. Third, you're able to protect fundamental rights. Fourth, you're able to create separate laws for vulnerable sections, making sure their specific interests are met. And fourth, by doing so, minority groups get better representation. Right? Now, once we understand this, we look at the modes of federalism, which is cooperative and competitive and so on and so forth. So federalism is a primary form of government that we understood, where there are 2 kinds of layers of government. Now, depending on the relationship between the center and the states, will you be able to decide whether it's cooperative or competitive? Do we need both? Do we need one? What about confrontational federalism, which has now really started to happen? So cooperation is also including cooperative federalism, is where the center and the states are working together. They're working together for a common perspective, for a common policy outcome. So when you see the distribution of powers under Schedule 7, when you see regional councils set up by the Niti Aayog, when you see zonal councils, which are not a constitutional body, NDC, which is not a constitutional body, the only body of this which is constitutional is your interstate councils. These are constitutional bodies. rest they are not. Especially during the COVID lockdown, it was so impressive to see how the center and the states were working together. When, for example, the railway started a train, the train was carrying migrants from one part of the country to another. The state and the local administrations in different parts were hosting the trains, were making sure that the people were able to accurately and very easily reach to their destinations without being a safety risk to anybody or even having a safety risk to themselves. One must really commend the work that happened after the migrant crisis really blew in the face of the country. Competition or competitive federalism is of two forms, where the center is competing with the states, and second is the states are also competing with each other. The states would be competing with each other independently also, and the states would be competing with each other for greater attention from the center also. This is particularly true post 1991 LPG, where doors to foreign investment opened up, and of course there were more data-centric reforms that had to be taken. We've seen the ease of doing business indexes, logistic indices, where you rank states, and on the basis of those, of course, investment decisions are often made, right? अरे अभिषेक वैष्णव, ये नोट्स तो मैंने आपको भी प्रोवाइड करे हैं. सेम लिंक में आपको ये नोट्स मिलेंगे बेटा. सेम लिंक में अभिषेक, सेम लिंक में. हैव यू गाइस नॉट सीन? ये पुराने बैचेस को ये नोट्स नहीं दिख रहे हैं क्या? एक सेकेंड. ये देखो, कुछ नहीं करना है, गूगल में जाना है, हमारा BIT वाली लिंक खोलनी है, bit.ly polity.gov notes. देखो ये खोल दिया, मेंस नोट्स में चले गए, अपडेटेड नोट्स में चले गए, ये देखो. और इसका प्रिंट वर्जन भी दिया है मैंने आपको, ये रहा, प्रिंटेबल फ्रेंडली ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट. बिल्कुल आपने काम में कोई कमी नहीं मिलेगी आपको, राइट? ओके. हाँ. All right. So of course this is how they compete with each other. Then you also have a form of what is called confrontational federalism, where the center and the states have some or the other kind of disputes, like interstate water disputes, sharing of taxes. The whole issue of 356 is in fact a dispute. The CBI jurisdiction issue, and more recently, of course, GST, where rates have to be collectively relied upon. GST council में issues होते हैं, compensation related issues होते हैं, right? जन आरोग्य योजना में states बोलते हैं हम नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि health state subject है. Then of course your recent farm bills. There are several examples of all of this, right? Naveen, I have to speak to you after class today. You're a law optional student. Thanks for saying hi. मैं करता हूँ तुमसे बात यार, बहुत दिन हो गए. ठीक है? All right. Now, over and above this, let's get into the technicalities. भाई cooperative federalism होता क्या है? Why are we trying to do this? What are the basic reasons behind this? Right? So let's see. See, cooperative federalism is essentially where the interaction between the center and the states is based on some collaborative effort so that they can collectively use their energy and resources to maximize welfare and goals. Now, governments usually in cooperative federalism share a horizontal relation than a hierarchical one, which means they're working together with each other. It is an important tool which helps greater participation of the states. अब कैसे करते हैं? Schedule 6, Interstate Council under 263, as I told you, they are constitutional bodies. I told you zonal councils are not, they were set up under Reorganization Act. कोई मीटिंग नहीं होती, ना इंटरस्टेट की होती है ना जोनल की होती है. नेशनल डेवलपमेंट काउंसिल was set up politically after the 2009, where the PM and the bodies of all other states are going to be present. Interstate Water Disputes Act, where they're supposed to sit together in a specialized tribunal and come to a conclusion. The fact that Panchayati Raj, we're going to cover this today, is in the state list, and the center has only created a structure of Panchayati Raj. But how powerful the Sarpanch is going to be, will largely be dependent only and only on the states. So that kind of a balance that we have created, right? That kind of a balance that we have created is only possible through cooperative federalism. Ravi, please be patient. Now, what are the other measures that have been taken? So the fact that you moved from a top-down to a bottom-up approach wherein the planning commission has been set up, the fact that you have a GST council comprising of the finance ministers of all the states and the finance ministers of India, where they all sit down and collectively approve of GST rates, the fact that you started giving more percentage of resources from the taxes that have to be distributed between the center and the states, the fact that you have regional councils and very specifically the Niti Aayog, the Niti Forum for development in the Northeast are good examples. Tabish civil services governance मैं बाद में कराऊंगा, अभी इसको ध्यान दो. वहीं पे अटक जाते हैं, हमको कौन निकालेगा नौकरी से, ठीक है. Now, what are your challenges to federalism? All of this cooperation only works well when there is trust between the two parties. If you don't trust your parents, you will never trust their decision for you. So there's a trust deficit. Second, the multi-party parliamentary democracy in India is also a sword with two edges. Now, why is it a sword with two edges? See, it is a sword with two edges because if there is a political party A at the center and there's a political party B in that state, there will always be political rivalry between the two parties and people will not be able to rise above the politicization of governance. Governance should be how politics should be fought. Politics is not how governance should be decided. Something that most parties and most countries also don't get. Apart from this, there are of course local law and order issues which really throw us off the path of cooperative and collaborative development. Whether it's Naxalism, which is a development deficit issue, terrorism, insurgency, in fact regionalism also. So restrictions to trade and commerce, a sense of disdain for other state populations working there. There are of course these issues that continue to be very strong challenges to federalism in the country. And the fact that at the end of the day, the center gets more taxes than the states, while the states are geographically more rampant than the central government per se, makes the states fundamentally have an issue with the federal structure in the country. Which is why we must also then understand how competitive federalism works. See, in competitive federalism, there is not only, as I was telling you, competition between the center and the states to do better, but there is also competition amongst the states on the states to be incentivized for their good work. Now, post 1990s, where markets opened up, where socialism changed in its form and format, where there was more free and open resources of yes, Nishant, I have taken that into account. I will get back to you today. When, of course, there is a greater availability of resource access and exploitation, what usually ends up happening is one of the most common outcomes of liberalization, privatization, globalization is economic inequality, as witnessed by the economic inequality reports that keep getting released from time to time from several agencies across the world. The fact that today we are largely living in an open market with foreign direct investments opened up across all major sectors, what happens is that every government is trying to get the best possible investment or infrastructure that they can. Even if, let us say, whether it is getting investment into a state where the political party is conducive to the center or a different state altogether, there is of course a heavy degree of investments. And the ground rule is that if you are a foreign investor, you would rather spend money, you would rather spend your resources in a place where there is a good law and order situation, that there will not be logistical challenges to the crores and crores of rupees that you may have to spend on previously allocated funds and all of those things. So this is why competitive federalism is important. It's like how a classroom has to run. Should you scold students or should you be nice to them? You should scold and be nice to them. That's exactly how competitive and collaborative federalism really work. And what are the broad steps that have been taken? First, of course, the Niti Aayog, through their indices, through incentivization, through aspirational district programs, through regional councils with specific mandates, all of those things. In fact, the fact that the center has increased the borrowing limit right at the beginning of the pandemic of state governments from 3 to 5% for their GDP, so that they can take more loans, so that they can invest more in infrastructure. The fact that states are now competing, you have Orissa, Gujarat, Karnataka, Andhra investment summits. The most popular one is also now become a tool of diplomacy called the Invest in Vibrant Gujarat. Just a few days ago during the budget discussions, there were also focuses on Gift City, the Gujarat International Financial City of some sort. They're also planning to build a financial services authority in Gift City, which is again like a sub-satellite city in Gujarat. The fact that you are supposed to compete for FDI, but the states on its own can't have Microsoft come and invest in Orissa. For Microsoft to come invest in Orissa in a specific sector, the center will still require to approve Microsoft, because at the end of the day, your approvals for FDI are centrally allocated through the Department of Promotion of Industry and Industrial Trade, Industry and Internal Trade, which is of course with the ministry. So these are the steps that have been taken. Apart from this, you've restructured centrally sponsored schemes in such a way that you've re-ranked them as core of core and optional. In core of core schemes, the center contributes a minimal amount of 70%. In core schemes, the center contributes a minimal amount of 60%. In optional, the center and the states equally share a 50-50 burden, to make sure that the right amount of schemes are being spent by the government. Over and above this, you've also started bailing out several electricity distribution companies to ensure that they are viable. This was also in the news recently in terms of what should the right path be. There were a couple of editorials. Aspirational district programs and selection of select cities as smart cities. I think Srinagar is also going to be one of those. So all of those is of course a move to promote competitive federalism. So why is my city not a smart city? Why is your city a smart city? Right? It does of course help you improve your indicators so that you can get better incentives. Apart from that, marks is what gives a lot of high and a lot of kick to a lot of people, which is how it also works in a lot of systems, right? Now, what are some examples of the states which have moved towards competitive federalism? You will see that a lot of states have, like Gujarat has made land laws easier. Maharashtra has also allowed for better and easier licensing of government-owned land. Andhra Pradesh has said you don't need land leases on 99 years. 33 years is more than enough. Gujarat and Karnataka have also passed several other land reforms in labor laws where it's easier and more compliant. Uttar Pradesh has also looked at a startup policy where startups are going to get tax waivers, electricity waivers, and so on and so forth for all of this, right? No, Naveen, it cannot happen. Tesla FDI. So there is already FDI approved in the automobile sector and the energy and the EV sector. For a specific company to be allowed in the country, you would still require a DPIIT approval. So yeah, absolutely. ठीक है. वो Elon Musk had tweeted a while ago that we are not able to start because of issues with the government. Now, when we look at specific challenges, see, the problem is that when social sector spending has come down and we've now started to focus more on capital expenditure, which has also been the focus of this year's budget, which has led to lesser income in the hands of the states because the states are not that financially viable as opposed to the reserves at the center. As a result, the Bimaru and the non-Bimaru states also end up, create a lot of what is your question, Abhishek Sinha? यार एक तो क्लास के बीच में जब तक सवाल ना हो तब तक कुछ बोलो नहीं तो बेहतर है. लिखा तो है स्वच्छ भारत रैंकिंग फॉर कॉम्पिटिटिव फेडरलिज्म, क्या प्रॉब्लम है? Don't add content to the class, Baba. Let the content be with me. ठीक है, बाद में तुमको जो ज्ञान देना है तुम दे देना. Don't break the damn flow of the class. Anyways, where was I? So, what has basically happened is, because some states have really benefited from globalization and FDI, they've really shot up on their rankings. But of course, the poorer states have continued to be poor. It's a reflection, isn't it? If the rich have gotten richer, the richer states have gotten richer. If the poor have gotten poorer, then the poorer states have gotten far more poorer. Okay, right? Yes. Now, over and above this, what has now started happening is that the interstate competition it's too early to say that this model of competitive federalism really works. What you can say is that we will only be able to know whether this works or not in the right amount of time. You can't say one is better than the other. Really, you can't. And of course, you can't put a one shoe fit all kind of a policy, which is where you need states like Bengal, Bihar, Orissa to constantly have their objections that, boss, we are not the same, don't treat us the same, right? And of course, while the states have been given some amount of financial independence, this will only happen if, in addition to money, your core structural growth, such as labor, education, skill, also improves. And that is, of course, a gap which takes a very long time to sort of fill, right? Okay. क्या पूछ रहा है अवनीश? Means for company to come and invest, come in FDI approval. But when company want to set up plant, discussion is between. अरे plant तो तब सेटअप करोगे ना जब ओवरऑल आपको अप्रूवल मिलेगा आने का. Anyways, चलो. Are they both complementary? What should India follow? So the idea is they are complementary and India should follow a little bit of both. The middle path, the Buddhist policy is the right policy, right? So though competitive and cooperative federalism actually seem to be contrary, they're actually not. They have the same underlying principle, which is national interest. And in fact, several of the ebooks of Niti Aayog talk about competitive federalism as a force multiplier. What is a force multiplier? A force multiplier is that if you push people to do better, they will do better across multiple zones and dimensions. And competitiveness, of course, is an idea which has always stood the test of time, but this should also be supplemented with some core economic and social growth. Like, for example, if you need to implement GST, please do that not by force, not by incentivizing states that if you agree, we'll do this. Make sure it's participative, it's collaborative, and therefore it is, far more inclusive in nature, right? And of course, if you see everybody works together, then of course our rankings improve. Now, the World Ease of Doing Business Index for the world has been retracted by the World Bank because of some statistical concerns, but India has its own interstate Ease of Doing Business Index that we can keep referring to. Okay. Now, aspirational districts, smart city is something that we've done very well in terms of convergence. However, agriculture is something that you need to really work collaboratively for. Farm laws is the best example. And at the end of the day, get the best people, celebrate them, call out the worst people. This is basic human resources for states, honestly. Whatever human resources you require for companies and people, this is human resources for center and states, nothing else. And therefore, make sure that these rankings are in public domain. Accountability is always, always at the highest priority, and ultimately will lead to good governance, right? So these are your concluding arguments. You can remember these arguments. I've just concluded them I've just reframed the same thing in separate questions in case you get those questions. Now, what are the things that India can specifically do? This is your conclusion, that you need special focus on deficit states. Make sure that the stronger states help the other states. Please make sure that interstate council starts working. There are more interstate discussions. You need to give states greater autonomy for local issues. You need expert advice for states which are deficient in nature. You would also make sure that for contentious issues, there is a faster and a timed resolution process. Though I understand states don't need to be concerned for international obligation, but it'll always be nice if you speak to them once in a while, and of course try to give them good credit for things that they do. Don't just promote your own party states, promote the good work of all the states. They will always feel better. कभी भी मैंने बीजेपी गवर्नमेंट को सेंटर में उड़ीसा को प्रेस करते हुए नहीं देखा. मैंने कभी भी कांग्रेस गवर्नमेंट को सेंटर में एक बीजेपी रूल स्टेट को रूल करते प्रेस करते हुए नहीं देखा. ऐसे मत करो. At the end of the day, governance is governance, and governance should always be celebrated in its entirety. I'll give that into account, Bharat. Is it too fast, guys? I thought this was okay, but if it's too fast, I'll further slow down. This is a story, which is why I didn't want to bore you with a lot more details. And therefore, India needs a mix of both competitive and cooperative federalism, as Niti Aayog calls it, competitive cooperative federalism. Okay? And therefore, what should our 6 pillars of federalism be? Autonomy of states, integration, centralization, decentralization, nationalization, and regionalization. I got this from a secretary's conference which has held about 6 months ago on with respect to the finance ministry. बहुत research करनी पड़ती है इन चीज़ों के लिए. And of course, apart from this, you have extreme political centralization or extreme chaotic decentralization can lead to issues across both counts. I understand that federalism is an issue. When Akash Pandey says obviously fast, I find that to be slightly disrespectful, because what is obvious to you may not really be obvious to me, right? Thank you. Right? So, of course, federalism must reconcile with the need for national unity on one hand and regional autonomy on the other. Okay? So, this covers your basics and theory of federalism. You can take a 10-minute break. Then we'll start with the 15th Finance Commission and the special state areas that have to be covered. Okay? Yes, Nair, absolutely. All right. Yukta, I'll check your email. Shubham, the form of the notes. Suryansh, the notes, yeah. Shubham, anything in the 9th schedule which violates basic structure can be judicially reviewed. Before or after Kesananda Bharti doesn't matter. So it is a midpoint where school ends and college begins, Naveen, which is why concurrent list also has a repugnancy of some sorts. Okay, Chetram. Yukta, I'll explain how governance will be done for you towards the end of the class. Now, I am not going to get into the bodies, the composition of Finance Commission at the moment. We'll do them collectively when we do the bodies later on. But to just give you a broad idea, under Article 280 of the Constitution, the Finance Commission has been conceptualized as a constitutional body appointed by the President, has one chairperson and 4 members. They have a tenure of 5 years in total. We'll come to the details in a fair bit. Just give me some time. Right now, we're going to focus on center state and the 15th Finance Commission. It's an incredibly different Finance Commission to the point that it has some changes to the way the criteria has to be evolved. Primarily, the Finance Commission does 3 things. First, the tax which has to be distributed between the center and the states, the proportion of how much the center gets and how much do the states get, that is something which it looks into. Second, it also recommends how money should be spent for strengthening local self-government, your panchayats and municipalities. And third, any other issue of fiscal policy that the Finance Commission may deem fit, right? Now, we're going to come to 4 basic things. First, we'll understand why are we talking about it. Second, what are the issues with what it is trying to do? Third, how has it changed the allocation criteria? Fourth, what does it recommend on resource allocation? And fifth, what are the challenges with the way we spend our money and in the view of the Finance Commission? So let's spend some time on the introduction. This is important. I'll go a little slow on this because this is slightly technical. See, the final report of the 15th Finance Commission is actually called Finance Commission in COVID Times, report for 21 to 26. The Commission's term in this scenario was extended by 1 year in November 19 to sort of make special arrangements, to make special recommendations post the bifurcation of the state of J&K and the abrogation under 370. This in fact is a special Finance Commission because it is the first Finance Commission of the post-planning commission era, and it's the second Finance Commission in the history of the Finance Commissions of India to have submitted reports in 2 phases as it has done so. Now, the key data points that are in fact very striking, which you can write in your introduction to the Finance Commission, is that the first part is, when I say the Hindi belt states, it largely means the states which speak Hindi as a language. These 6 Hindi belt states, dominantly in the north and the central part of the country, contribute to about 42% of the population. And they have been given 48% of the shareable tax pool. On the other hand, the 5 southern states, which contribute about 21% of the population, have been given 15% of the shareable pool. And when we look at the 7 northern, eastern or the western states in terms of geography, which contribute about 30% of the population, have been given about 25% of the shareable pool. However, when we look at the 8 northeastern states, which without J&K, which contribute about 5% of the population, have been given 10% of the shareable pool. So I'll tell you where the problem is. The problem here is that you're giving lesser money to southern states because their population has significantly reduced with the 71 base year. So instead of rewarding them for doing great work on population control, you're reducing the amount of money that they should get simply because they have lesser people. On the other hand, the North Indian belt, which hasn't been very successful in their population control measures, are actually rewarded for not being successful by getting more money recommendations as far as the Finance Commission is concerned. So this is where the whole concept of competitive federalism, where good work is to be incentivized, becomes a questionable sort of an issue. Okay, now this is primarily your ecosystem, your introduction for questions on the Finance Commission. Now let's look at the next part, which is what are your issues generally with the mandate, right? So let's understand this. When we look at the mandate issue, see, the Constitution under Article 280 Clause 4 gives the Finance Commission absolute independence to determine their procedure, and that is in quotes, that how do they want to go about the recommendation process and exercise any such power that the Parliament may regulate by law, right? Now, understandable that you have the powers to sort of run your own systems your own way, and the Parliament can authorize you to do things through the enactment of a law. But when we look at the objectives, which is another fancy word for objective is terms of reference, TOR. When we look at some of the terms of reference for the 15th Finance Commission, what do we understand? First, we understand that the measurable performance-based incentive for states, which means that you are going to award states for doing well on schemes, on socio-economic indicators, by providing them a slightly higher percentage of the tax revenue. Now this makes sense because if the grounds for measuring those performances, if the criteria for deciding what is a good performing state is a good one, so when we look at some of the criteria, they're actually very good in terms of how have they progressed on population, the implementation of certain central flagship schemes, promotion of ease of doing business, sanitation, ending open defecation, waste management. All of those things are great. Second, in terms of how effective the states have been to ensure more and more people are paying GST, to make sure that GST is covering more and more people. All of these are great things, are genuinely great things. But the problem here is that first two points are great. You're making an objective decision. But the problem here is control or lack of it in incurring expenditure on populist measures. Firstly, what is populist and what is not populist is very subjective. So either are the states supporting the populist measures of the center, or are the states going against the populist measures of the center and doing their own, which could be populist in another manner? This creates a lot of subjectivity, and that subjectivity for a numbers driven organization is in fact a matter of grave concern. So that's the first part. Second, who is the Finance Commission to decide and to reward the states that, boss, see, you're implementing the schemes better, so we are going to recommend more money to you? No. Your job has to be very clear in terms of tax distribution. When you link tax to performance, the Finance Commission may be slightly overstepping its boundaries. The problem is because when you are changing the terms of reference, you're saying that, boss, if you do A, B, C, D, E, we will think of giving you more money from the tax pool. Now, this evaluation should be done at the parliamentary level, not at the level of an appointed authority, which primarily consists of economic and financial experts. So this is the primary issue with respect to the 15th Finance Commission. Now, when we look at the allocation criteria on how are you giving money, there are certain things which are good, there are certain things which are of course problematic. So Article 280 clause 3 of the Constitution very clearly states that the Finance Commission has three things to do. The first is recommendations for central and vertical sharing of the net proceeds of taxes. How much money will the center get? How much money will the states get out of the divisible pool, right? And also deciding how much money should the states be given as grants, not as loans, as grants. And third, as I said before, what more can we do to strengthen local self-government? This is what your criteria should be as per the Constitution, right? This is what your function is, and to achieve this function, there are three basic ways to get there: equity, equalization, and efficiency. Now, what is equity? Equity means depending on circumstances and depending on conditions, people should be treated accordingly, a lot like equal protection of law. So what are the equity parameters? That states with larger populations and larger areas should be given more funds. Okay. Now, how do you decide? 10% of the allocation, or 10% of the reasons for that allocation will have to be taken into account from the 2011 census instead of the 1971 census, which is a good thing that you're updating your population base here. But the problem is, instead, when you see the 2011 population rates versus the 1971 population rates, the 2011 population rates tell us that there is a lot of migration to the north, and there is a lot more population in the northern part of the country than the southern part of the country. Thereby, the northern part of the country is going to get more money than the southern part of the country, which we highlighted in the introduction also in our data points. So that's the equity issue. So the equity issue is a little bit of a gray area. Then you have an equalization issue. Now, what is equalization? Equalization is, you see the parameters with respect to propensity, which is, say, distance of per capita income or fiscal capacity from the prosperous one. You're comparing each other. Like, for example, how much is the gap of performance between a Gujarat and a Jharkhand, for that matter? And to determine how much money should you give a Bihar to come to the same level as Maharashtra in terms of economic propensity. Half of that reason should be for income differences, forest covers, and of course the total area. This is still which is readily accepted and really celebrated upon. The third issue is efficiency, where how much effort has been put by the states to make sure that the taxes are adequately collected, and the states are also making sure that their interest payments and everything else are in order. However, the Finance Commission does not mention any specific criteria as to this is what is meant by the tax effort. And as a result, from 32 to 42% from the previous Finance Commission, they've carried forward the same differentiation. But the difference in the 15th Finance Commission is that 42% is not 42% for all the states. It's actually 41% for all the states except 1% which has to go for J&K. A specific 1% allocation for J&K. A lot of people thought it was a populist measure to please J&K after the abrogation of 370. The central government justifies it by saying we need the kind of money so that we can make sure that adequate resources are able to reach J&K. Now, speaking of resources, how are we supposed to make sure the money comes in? You should also refer to a couple of your economics lectures on this. So basically, recommendation for reducing off-budget borrowings, which means unless the budget has specifically provisioned for you to borrow it locally or internationally, you should not borrow it very actively. And second, try to ensure that your direct tax rates are stable for all subgroups through the year. And third, you have to make sure that the limits of these direct tax rates should always be very, very clearly demarcated, which of course the finance minister did in the 21-22 budget, and also by extension would be doing here. However, a lot of other important recommendations were ignored. The first is, of course, that revenue neutrality of GST rates, which means that your GST rates depend on your income. A lot of people demanded that this is affecting their taxation propensities to a large extent. Two, the finance commission wanted, there was a lot of representation to the finance commission that instead of having different GST rates for different products and services, you should make a flat 3-rate structure of a merit rate, a standard rate, and a demerit rate of 28, 29, and 30% for all goods and services. Unfortunately, that has also not been recommended. And third, because there are so many different GST rates for so many different products, it makes the process of GST extremely complex and problematic. Apart from this, there is also something called professional tax, which is levied on professions such as lawyering, etc., which is levied in 21 states at the 1988 inflation rate, which is basically 2,500 rupees, which is nothing. So it is recommended that since cost of incomes have increased, standard of life has increased, people are earning more money, so professional taxes should be to about 18,000 instead of 2,500, with some mathematical computations in place. I would again recommend that you would want to go through your economics lectures for greater detail, but for polity, this is more than enough. You don't need anything else. And as far as expenditure is concerned, this is where the government doesn't seem to really be on track on this, because this was also in the context of the pandemic. They've recommended that the health expenditure should be more than 8% of their budget by 2022. That doesn't seem to be the case this year. Second, they said that the public health expenditure, public health is spending money on health issues which have a larger implication. Public health kya hota hai? Public health is, for example, tobacco is a public health issue, sanitation is a public health issue, hygiene is a public health issue, oral health is a public health issue. Right? Issues which affect a very large population and require not only a mass cure but also a mass awareness. They should start spending more money, to about 2.5% of the GDP. वो भी नहीं कर रहे हैं. Given that our current healthcare expenditure still hovers around 1% and sub 1% of the GDP, we should look at least spending about 2.5% by 2025. The commission, although did not tell you how you should be able to do this, but of course this was something which was ignored. And it also said that, boss, your centrally sponsored schemes such as the Health Mission and the Jan Arogya Yojana are largely where the central government spends, and these are of course from a top to bottom approach. What you should do is that in order to eliminate any objections by the states, you should try and ensure that the states are given enough room to customize these schemes to the best of their ability, to suit their local conditions. For example, if the state has an X number of disease outcomes more prevalent in their region, then you should try and ensure that the state gets to include that disease in the Jan Arogya sort of Yojana in their disease coverage. And of course, the commission also said that, boss, you are very unequally spending your money in your central sector schemes, where 15 out of the 30 schemes count for about 90% of the total allocation under centrally sponsored schemes. Clear? Understood this? Are we okay with this? Yes? All right. Simple enough. Now, what were the broad policy ideas that the scheme gave that the government should implement? And you can use this for fiscal policy in economics also, by the way. Is that first, you should have a dedicated non-lapsable fund for maintenance of defense and internal security, to make sure that sometimes the money that you've allocated for defense expenditure and the money that you actually end up having, there is always a slip between the cup and the lip. So you should be able to sort of bridge for any exigency demands. Second, you should restructure your Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act in a way that the objectives and the percentage reductions are more realistic and achievable. Third, it is high time, and I really personally like the third recommendation, is that you should now have a credit rating of the states. Like you could hire a CRISIL or somebody. And fourth, the CAG primarily looks at post-expenditure evaluations, but you should also have an independent fiscal council which gets to see how the government wants to spend, has been spending, and keep charting out the right course of action, because your parliamentary committees such as the Estimates Committee and the departmentally related standing committee are not particularly doing a very, very good job of it, which is why it becomes slightly more difficult, right? Now, when we look at certain, this is all that you need to know, by the way, I'm sorry, this is all that you need to know for finance commissions. If the question comes, whether it's in the pre or the mains, यहाँ से सारे आपके questions निकल जाएंगे. Now, we have to look at certain special case statuses. So we look at Pondicherry and of course we look at Delhi in detail. But these are some of the special states that exist in terms of what they are. So they have we have a de facto asymmetrical federalism with references to size, population, wealth, etc. So Nagaland 371A, Sikkim 371F, Mizoram 371G, JNK 370. Fifth schedule also has further areas for distinctive administration, and then you have the sixth schedule also. Then you have Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram for the sixth schedule. Then you also have union territories which are administered under 239 to 241. Under the 69th Amendment, 239A, etc. were added. Then of course, the justification is union territories are too small to be called states, but too big to be not given some form of identification, which is why they're called union territories. They're too distinct to not be given a separate identity, and they're too small to be given a full state. And the justification for Delhi primarily is that it houses most of the offices of the central government. Right? Now, let's understand in terms of the economic powers of union territories. It must be emphasized that all union territories except Delhi and Pondicherry, and now J&K will have their own legislative assemblies, but they still have their very limited financial powers and public accounts. In fact, except for Delhi, Pondicherry and J&K, they will not even have their own budgets and therefore no powers of taxation. Rather, their revenues and expenditures are a part of the union budget under the budget head of the Home Ministry. तो जो हमारा एनुअल बजट होता है 2022 का, उसी से ही दमन एंड दीव, दादर नगर हवेली, अंडमान निकोबार सबको पैसा जाता है. And Delhi and Pondicherry tend to have unlimited powers as long as they're generating their own resources. However, for the this point is important, that the Delhi government's budget, before the minister presents the budget to the Delhi Legislative Assembly, will require a prior approval of the president, which is on the advice of the Home Minister. Right? That's something which is very unique to Delhi because it has a central capital consequence of some sorts. Okay? Now, let's talk about Pondicherry a little bit, because on the basis of Pondicherry, will you see an implication to Delhi? As I was telling you before, Pondicherry largely comprises of 4 enclaves, which were of former French India. The Pondicherry district, the main one, which forms the capital of it all. Then you have Karaikal in Tamil Nadu, Yanam between Andhra Pradesh and Bengal, and Mahe enclosed by Kerala. And Pondicherry becomes one of those distinctive areas in Delhi, which has distinctive areas in the country, which primarily has what is called a 4-language formula. The 4-language formula is that Tamil will be the official language for all official purposes. Malayalam can be used for official purposes in the Mahe region, which is enclosed by Kerala. Telugu in the Yanam region, which is between Andhra Pradesh and Bengal, and of course English will be a link language wherein you will have a translation and a version available in English, as of course it also has a French origin, but we've not given French as a language status. Apart from this, very recently, there were with respect to the nomination powers of the Lieutenant Governor, the Supreme Court upheld the induction of three BJP MPs, three BJP members as MLAs in the Assembly of the Union Territory of Pondicherry by the centre unilaterally without consulting the elected local Congress government. There are some local provisions of nominations. However, and these are of course massively politicized. The case is called Union of India versus K. Lakshmi Narayan. This was then upheld, was then sent to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has of course given a partial judgment on this, but the larger issue of whether the Lieutenant Governor is the administrative head of the Pondicherry government or not is still pending. But the basic ये फंडा था कि आपने पौंडीचेरी सीएम से बिना पूछे नॉमिनेशन लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबली में किया कैसे. लेफ्टिनेंट गवर्नर ने कहा कि हमने तो कर दिया, सेंटर हम तो सेंटर के नॉमिनी, हमने तो कर दिया. So of course there is a larger issue of whether the Lieutenant Governor should listen to the CM of Pondicherry or to the central government. यही सेम इशू है दिल्ली का भी. So if this case gets decided, it is certainly going to have an impact on Delhi's situation. Though there have been two questions on Delhi's situation, I don't see anything else to be asked. I'll just give you a little bit of context. So you see, Delhi is Delhi because of its long history and a capital state status. Now there have been a lot of demands for Delhi statehood, and we'll analyze those demands in a very brief manner because I don't think there is going to be a question on this, at least this year. So as the capital of the country, the Delhi region performs several unique functions, such as first, it is supposed to assist the central government in fulfilling its constitutional mandate of certain macroeconomic stability, handling currency, defense, even diplomatic missions. They're all based out of Delhi. I'm sure all of you would have heard of the Chanakya Puri region and several other government offices all across the country. You see, when there are two basic arguments to this, that there is land law and order, and there's land public order and police which is not under Delhi. Now the question is, if the police is not under Delhi, and if the police is not under Delhi, and then you make the police under Delhi, will it really make a difference to policing in Delhi? I don't think so. It will really not make a difference. Why will it not make a difference? Because doesn't matter who the leadership of the police is. It doesn't matter under what government the leadership of the police is. The fundamental problem with the police is at the local level, is how the police officers deal with people, deal with women who go to the police stations and tell them that there is a problem and the police doesn't register a complaint. So what we require is an absolute sensitization of the police at the lower levels, and it does not make a difference if it is at the higher level, right? So that is the first issue. The second is, if you compare Delhi to Washington DC. See, in Washington DC, if you put a compass at the center and draw a 10-kilometer radius around it, you will be able to see that all central governments are within the 10-kilometer radius. The problem, however, is not this. The problem, however, is Delhi is not like that. Central government buildings in Delhi are currently all across Delhi. They are not in a 10-kilometer radius. So it will be very difficult for you to then manage. And third, you require security arrangements for VIP movement, for diplomatic events, for head of state visits and so on and so forth. So for a lot of those reasons, when Delhi police is directly under the Home Ministry, it's easier and it's better to coordinate, which is why it becomes a tricky issue. Most of your developmental subjects are anyways with the Delhi government, and if the interview board after your mains exam asks you a question, you can say that there is no reason per se to give Delhi the status of a full state, right? Now let's look at some of the developments. See, in 1991, around liberalization, the 69th amendment to the constitution was formulated, which basically added article 239 AA. One of the first nomenclature things that it did was it changed the name of the Union of Territory to the NCT of Delhi, and that is how the Gnctd law was enacted in pursuance and furtherance to Article 239 AA. Right now, and it designated the lieutenant governor as the administrator with the powers to promulgate an ordinance like any other union territory with legislature or any other legislature. But the issue is, with this, it never became a full state and it never was even a half state. It remained a union territory but was granted a legislative assembly like Pondicherry. So that is what Delhi is. Somebody was asking me that question in the comment box a while ago, right? Now, the Supreme Court in the 2018 judgment, which was asked in the mains exam, basically said that the lieutenant governor of Delhi, does not have to agree with every decision that the Delhi government makes. The word discretionary under 239 AA clause 4 is where there is, of course, a lot of debate. The Supreme Court said you don't have to unnecessarily refer every decision that the government wants you to approve and send it to your masters at the center. This is not to be done in a mechanical manner, and for all practical purposes, you have to abide by the elected government in Delhi because they fulfill what is called a democratic mandate, right? And that is something which was the primary essence of the whole law of Delhi, right? Now, very recently in 2021, they amended the Gnctd Act and said, but the government of Delhi means the lieutenant governor itself. So how will the lieutenant governor then be, listening to an inferior authority called the central government of the government of Delhi, right? So this is largely what your federal issues are, your federal principles are. Okay. Now, I want to also cover emergency in the right amount of detail with you. So for that, we'll have to go to the theme containing the precedent, because the emergency is in that as the president promulgates the emergency. And of course, I'll also run you through the case study of the Indira Gandhi emergency. Okay, I'll give you a quick 3 minute break, because I know you've been listening to me very carefully. We'll start with emergency. This should be in 6. Sorry. Some of the ministries of the central government, some of the offices are not just in central Delhi, some are in South Delhi, East Delhi also. इक्वलाइजेशन इज मतलब आप अगर किसी पुअर परफॉर्मिंग स्टेट को पैसा दे रहे हो तो आप हाई परफॉर्मिंग स्टेट को मैचअप करने के लिए दे रहे हो. Statehood will not be revived. Yeah. चलो, आपातकालीन, इमरजेंसी. ओके, आपातकालीन या फिर इमरजेंसी. लेट्स स्टार्ट. सबसे पहले आई गिव यू अ कॉन्टेक्स्ट कि भाई क्यों बात करते हैं. इमरजेंसी इज समथिंग विच इज a part of Indian jurisprudence for a very, very long time, ever since India, ancient history also. The great Indian jurist of ancient times, Manu, जिस पे मनुस्मृति based है, also recognizes something called Appardharm, right? Appardharm, okay? Hold on, Tarit, right? Parit, hold on. I'll answer that question towards the end of the class. ठीक है? Said upper dharma, which is one of the supreme duties or the dharma of the king or the protector of the kingdom against disorder and anarchy, right? No, it's okay. अब देखिए, see, the emergency provisions under the Indian Constitution can be traced back to the British rule in India. And when by an act of parliament, the crown established its sovereignty over the territories in 1861. That's after the revolt of 1857. Now, in the governor general also under these provisions had wide powers over the legislature and the executive. You were also given certain additional powers during the emergency. These were not used at all till the First World War, but till the First World War broke out. That is, once they did between 1914 to 1918, it was used about 26 times. And of course, there were challenges to this, but the courts did not really entertain it. In 1919, the famous Rowlatt Act, which is also one of India's first ever preventive detention laws, if you look at it from a specific way, was also to be used as an emergency measure. It was supposed to be stringent, it was supposed to detain people, was supposed to control terrorist activities. Then came the Government of India Act 1919, which reaffirmed the powers of the Governor General to promulgate ordinances in an emergency. Similar powers were conferred by the Government of India in 1935. Under this act, a proclamation could be given if there was a grave emergency of some sorts where the security was threatened, and was used in 1939 for the first time following the declaration of war between Britain and Germany, and of course India was supposed to play a supportive role. अब देखो, emergency का बड़ा simple system है. क्या simple system है? I'll give you the current law on the emergency. A selected bunch of ministers called the cabinet, and this is the only time the word cabinet finds mention in the constitution. बस एक ही जगह कैबिनेट का शब्द इस्तेमाल होता है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में, which is in the context of an emergency. Who is the cabinet? Entirely up to the PM, because the ministers are individually responsible to the PM and collectively to the Lok Sabha, right? Now, the cabinet in writing recommends to the president to issue an emergency. Then the emergency is imposed, and then over a period of time, within a specific period of time, it has to be approved by the parliament. Okay, it has to be approved by the parliament. An emergency, if you think about it, is a very aggressive version of an ordinance, because here you are severely altering center-state relations. Severely altering center-state relations. तो क्या होगा? एक होगा date of proclamation, एक होगा डेट ऑफ अप्रूवल। अब अप्रूव करी है तो फिर एक्सटेंड भी कर सकते हैं, कंटिन्यू भी कर सकते हैं, रिवोक भी कर सकते हैं, देयर सेवरल थिंग्स, बट बेसिक प्रोसीजर इमरजेंसी का बस इतना ही है, ठीक है। नाउ सो emergencies, as we understand, is nothing but a central power consolidation exercise. Now what is a central power consolidation exercise? It is that the powers are going to be with the center and will be taken away from the states, ठीक है। You have something called a national emergency under 352. सब clauses करने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है। There are 3 grounds as of today: war, external aggression and armed rebellion. Remember, the grounds are going to have a very important role to play on the impact. अगर ground ये है तो impact क्या होगा? Previously, this armed rebellion was to be called internal disturbance, which was of course misused to a fair extent during the 70s emergency. एक टाइम पे 2 इमरजेंसी, एक के बाद एक इमरजेंसी लग सकती है। National emergency does not mean just all India emergency. It could be a collection of 2+ states, it could be half a state. It nowhere mentions that a national emergency is all across India. Okay, so it could be applied to a specific part of India or even the whole country. National emergency has been applied 3 times in the country: 62, 71 and 75. The most popular emergency are state emergencies, also called presidential rules, more formally under 356. The ground for this is extremely important: the failure of constitutional machinery in a state. This has been imposed more than 125 times, ठीक है, in the last 70+ years. The third is a financial emergency, where there is a threat to a financial stability or credit of India. The law is not clear as to whether it has to be all India or a specific state, but it is generally understood that it is an all India emergency. State emergencies 356 is state-wise. This is not an all India emergency, ठीक है। This has never been imposed so far, though we came really close in 1991 post the LPG crisis, ठीक है। अब सिंपल मैथ्स करेंगे, लॉजिक लगाएंगे, इसके ऊपर प्लीज मत पढ़ना, कोई एग्जाम में नहीं पूछेगा, ठीक है। सो जस्ट पे एब्सोल्यूट अटेंशन। फर्स्ट, आर्टिकल 352 नेशनल इमरजेंसी, ठीक है। लेट अस से ऑन द एडवाइस ऑफ द कैबिनेट द प्रेसिडेंट डिक्लेयर्स नेशनल इमरजेंसी on 1st January 2022. On 1st January 2022, एक महीने तक कोई कुछ नहीं बोलेगा, मतलब एक महीने तक बिना किसी अप्रूवल के this emergency can run perfectly in the country, no questions asked, no problems at all, under any circumstances. But within 1 month, both the houses of the parliament must approve the national emergency through a special majority too. Why? Because it is going to affect center-state relation, which is more than 2/3 of present and voting. In such a way, it is half of the total strength of the house. मतलब 1st January से 1st February तक, इमरजेंसी 1st February 2022 तक इमरजेंसी तो चली जाएगी। अगर ये पास नहीं भी हुआ तो बिना पार्लियामेंट्री अप्रूवल के 1 महीना तो इमरजेंसी चल ही सकती है, अनलेस दे सिट ऑन द 10th of January एंड दे डिसअप्रूव इट कि नहीं हमको तो नहीं चाहिए। तो बिना किसी के चिक चिक करे कुछ बोले, फॉर 1 month द नेशनल इमरजेंसी कैन रन विदाउट एनी प्रॉब्लम व्हाटसोएवर, ठीक है। नाउ वेदर they approve it, they can only do it at arithmetic progressions of 6 months, और ये 6 महीने डेट ऑफ प्रोक्लेमेशन से शुरू होते हैं। तो लेट अस से they approve it, जैन, फेब, मार्च, अप्रैल, मई, जून, ये फर्स्ट लॉट हो गया. So by the 30th of June, they can continue it. So from June to so July, August, September, October, November, December, next 6 months. By 31st December, they can further extend it from 1st Jan onwards, and it continues like this. You can extend it for any number of times for 6 months at a time. ये कर सकते हो. That's no problem at all. ये चलता रहेगा, कोई इशू नहीं है. ठीक है. Remember the grounds. The grounds are security related. They are national security related. ठीक है, कि मतलब war, aggression, armed rebellion, ये सब. तो भाई जब security related है तो states की इतनी तो गलती नहीं है कि state बंद ही कर दो. So the state legislature or the executive is not suspended. उनको नहीं बोलते घर बैठो. You come to work. You do exactly what you do on a daily basis, no problem. The only difference is we can also do what you do. We can also do what you do. The state legislature can make laws on the state list. The parliament also will then be able to make laws on the state list. So if it is an all India emergency, then there will be nothing called a state list. Everything will be union list and concurrent list. The state list will be moved to concurrent list, just for the period of the national emergency. If there is a national emergency in one state, so for that state, the state list will now be concurrent list because the parliament can also make laws on state subjects. ये समझ में आया? You are basically saying, यार war का time है, some emergency laws have to be made, some actions have to be made. You do your own thing. We will also do it in case there needs to be an override. कुछ लॉ एंड ऑर्डर में चेंज करना है, कुछ क्राइम में चेंज करना है, हम भी कर सकते हैं. आप अगर हम नहीं कर दिए तो आप नहीं कर सकते. बहुत सिंपल है. ठीक है. एंड व्हाट इफ इट एक्सटेंड्स फॉर मोर देन 5 years? द ऑर्डिनरी ड्यूरेशन फॉर लोअर हाउसेज इज 5 years. देन यू कैन एक्सटेंड इट बाय 1 year एट अ टाइम. दैट्स नॉट अ प्रॉब्लम एट ऑल. ये अलग चलता है, ये अलग चलता है. ठीक है. नाउ because you have the powers to make everything, to give orders, to make laws on the state list, that means you also have the powers to give executive direction on the state list. बस इतना ही legislative और governmental impact है, और कुछ है ही नहीं. बस. But grounds क्या है? Security. अब सिक्योरिटी, आपको जाके उधर वॉर चल रही है, मोबाइल फोन से टिकटॉक वीडियो बनाओगे? विल यू मेक अ टिकटॉक वीडियो? नो, राइट? You want to go travel the country, see the country, reside in Goa, reside in the hills. नहीं कर सकते ना, नहीं कर सकते. So under 352 in that presidential order, Article 19 is automatically suspended. मतलब जब तक national emergency है, Article 19 doesn't exist for you, not at all. ठीक है. Any other right, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 22, 23, so on and so forth. If the cabinet wants, they can ask the president to write it in the order कि अब article 14 में नहीं है, 15 में नहीं है. The two rights that you can't stop, the two rights you can't stop from existing is 20 and 21, which are the most important rights, because 21 covers everything else and covers every right in a way. And 20 is, of course, your justice rights such as incrimination, double jeopardy, and retrospective application of law. Okay. Now, what is a moratorium? A moratorium is a temporary ban. यही होता है. जैसे moratorium आपने BT कॉटन में पढ़ा होगा कभी. So what is a moratorium? A moratorium is under the national emergency, the president can say, till the time the national emergency is in process, you cannot come to the Supreme Court or the High Court for any fundamental right violation. जब ये खत्म हो जाएगी emergency, suppose the emergency was from 1st January to 30th June. On 15th of February, your fundamental right to 14 has been violated. But there is a moratorium कि आप Supreme Court, High Court नहीं आ सकते. लेकिन 30 जून को इमरजेंसी खत्म होगी, तो 1 जुलाई को आप सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाके बोलना वो 15 फेब को मेरा आर्टिकल 14 वायलेट हुआ था. यू कैन टेम्पररली स्टॉप पीपल फ्रॉम अप्रोचिंग द कोर्ट फॉर एनी फंडामेंटल राइट. But the two fundamental rights that can't stop from being existing is 20 and 21. अब जैसे सपोज आर्टिकल 19 सस्पेंडेड है, ठीक है, आप सुप्रीम कोर्ट और हाई कोर्ट 1 जुलाई को जाके नहीं बोल सकते मेरी आर्टिकल 19 वायलेट हुई थी, बिकॉज आर्टिकल 19 डज नॉट एग्जिस्ट. 20 and 21 exist, but you can delay the challenge during the tenure of the national emergency. This is what one of the last clauses of 352 is. ये समझ में आया? This is what is called a moratorium on 32 and 226. कि जब तक इमरजेंसी है भाई काम करने दो, अभी इतना टाइम नहीं है कि कोर्ट के पास जाके बोले कि ये क्या हुआ वो क्या हुआ ऐसे क्यों किया. 2021 है ना, चलो ठीक है. If we are violating a 2021, let the this thing get over, emergency get over, then you come to court, हम सुन लेंगे. उसके पहले war का time. This is the basic simple explanation to what is called your emergency. This is your national emergency. Then is state emergency. 356. अब देखो rule number 2, center stronger than the states. A national emergency can continue without approval for 1 month. Here, 2 months. And here you only require a simple majority approval. Here you require a special majority approval. Center stronger than the states. अब फर्क क्या है? कुछ तो कैंडी देना पड़ेगा. This cannot be indefinite. भाई war can be indefinite, no? But this cannot be indefinite. Why? Because your grounds are breakdown of कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मशीनरी. तो ठीक कर दो ना, गवर्नमेंट बदल दो. यहां गवर्नमेंट बदलने से वॉर थोड़ी ना रुकेगी, विच इज वाई इट कैन बी इनडेफिनिट बट एट 666 months ऑफ इंटरवल्स. राइट? अंडरस्टूड दिस? यस, गुड. नाउ Akshat is saying, I'm sorry to interrupt and is still asking questions, so calm down. No, Baba, wait for some time. That is also true for Avnish also. कि सर एक्सटर्नल एग्रेशन है तो चाइना में इमरजेंसी लगा दे. भाई 2 मिनट शांति रखिएगा. 2 मिनट प्लीज, 2 मिनट कृपया आपसे है ना रिक्वेस्ट है. 2 मिनट. सम चिल्ड्रन नेवर लर्न. एनीवेज, सो द बैलेंसिंग फैक्टर, द hollow candy is you have a time limit of 3 years. A time limit of 3 years. What is your time limit of 3 years? The time limit of 3 years is 3 साल से ज़्यादा, मतलब 1 जनवरी 2022 से 1 जनवरी 2025, मैक्सिमम इतने टाइम तक. द डिफरेंस इज योर फर्स्ट अप्रूवल कैन बी फॉर 1 year, देन योर नेक्स्ट अप्रूवल्स कैन ओनली बी फॉर 666 months each. बस फॉर 666 months each. ठीक है? नाउ what is your ground? Breakdown of the constitutional machinery of the state. मतलब सरकार का प्रॉब्लम है ना, सरकार को बोलो घर बैठे. फर्स्ट पार्ट, हाउ इज द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मशीनरी फेल्ड? बिकॉज योर अथॉरिटीज हैवंट बीन एबल टू इम्प्लीमेंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैल्यू. तुम्हारा लॉ एंड ऑर्डर कैसे फेल हुआ? इसलिए तो स्टेट एग्जीक्यूटिव श्योरली सस्पेंडेड. ओके, डिपेंडिंग ऑन द एक्सटेंट ऑफ इश्यूज, स्टेट लेजिस्लेचर्स ऑफ कोर्स दे डू नॉट फंक्शन. उनको कोई घर नहीं बेचता है. They can either be suspended or they can be dissolved. And then the president is empowered to make your rules and regulations through the governor. ठीक है? अगर बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम है तो असेंबली ही डिसॉल्व कर दो. तभी तो जैसे ही पोलिटिकल क्राइसिस होता है, the first thing most people abuse this provision by is by, of course, imposing presidential rule. ठीक है? ये मेंस में क्यों नहीं आता? Because ये बहुत political है. Now think about it logically. If the grounds are the failure of constitutional machinery of a state, if the grounds are the failure of the constitutional machinery of a state, if these are your grounds, clearly, understandably, these are your grounds, then इसका fundamental rights से क्या लेना देना? If you actually reduce the fundamental rights, you are further worsening the constitutional machinery of the state. You are further worsening the constitutional machinery of the state. And because you are further worsening the constitutional machinery of the state, you will therefore also be penalized in the same respect. तो भाई fundamental right को कुछ मत करो ना, उससे क्या ही लेना देना. बस This is 356. Then you have Article 360. Similarly, this is financial. So 2 months. अब कड़की टाइम देख के थोड़ी ना बताती है कि हाँ 6 दिन के बाद कड़की खत्म हो जाएगी, नहीं होता ना ऐसे. सो इट इज इनडेफिनिट फ्रॉम द टाइम ऑफ प्रोक्लेमेशन, एंड ये एक बार ही लगती है और जब तक चाहिए तब तक लगती है, राइट. एंड सिंपल मेजॉरिटी में अप्रूवल है. इट्स द सेम थिंग ऑफ अ नेशनल इमरजेंसी माइनस FR इम्पैक्ट. मतलब the parliament can make laws on state subjects also, because in that scenario you can reduce any expenditure needed. कोई भी वो charged expenditure to CFI, judge का तनख्वाह, ESI का तनख्वाह, everything can be reduced if needed. And financial emergency का fundamental right से क्या लेना देना? So let it be. बस. So if you think about it, if financial emergency except for fundamental rights has an equally chilling effect as that of the national emergency. Clear? Understood? कुछ मुश्किल था इसमें? नहीं. जितना आएगा इतने से ही आएगा. All right. Now, what are some other correlative provisions? First is Article 22, where your arrest and your preventive detention was misused during the emergency. 123 and 213, if the president and governor are empowered to issue ordinances. This is of course being used sometimes rather aggressively, and an emergency is correlative to ordinances in terms of bypassing the parliament. Okay. Now, there have been several constitutional amendments to emergency provisions. The first is the 38th Amendment, which was its own dragon in its own way. It said you cannot question the reasoning or whether the president was satisfied with the cabinet advice. Right? The president was satisfied with the cabinet advice when national emergency had to be imposed. ठीक है. And also provided कि एक के साथ एक 1+1 free भी हो सकता है. This was later changed. The 39th Amendment, which caused a lot of issues with respect to Indira Gandhi, it said कि president, vice president, PM और speaker इनका इलेक्शंस जुडिशली रिव्यू नहीं हो सकता, बिल्कुल भी नहीं हो सकता, चाहे कुछ भी हो जाए. ठीक है. सो नो सुप्रीम कोर्ट रिव्यू हियर एंड ऑल्सो नो सुप्रीम कोर्ट रिव्यू हियर. बेसिक. क्यों? क्योंकि इंदिरा गांधी का इलेक्शन चैलेंज होके डिसरिगार्ड कर दिया था इलाहाबाद हाई कोर्ट ने. So this was a counter to the Allahabad High Court judgment, Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan. Then comes the 42nd and the 44th Amendment. ठीक है. 42nd Amendment is the most controversial. Your fundamental rights, directive principles, इन तरह का बहुत सारा कुछ हुआ था. Your fundamental duties were also added. Preamble was also amended. The most primary problem was the 42nd Amendment was passed during the peak of the emergency. इतनी क्या जरूरत थी भाई? Right? And of course, there's a retaliation to the case on Andhra Bharti case and so on and so forth. The 44th Amendment is where they tried to balance things a bit. Internal disturbance was then made armed rebellion. Cabinet होगा, writing में देगा जवाब. ठीक है. एंड ये सिंपल मेजॉरिटी को चेंज करके स्पेशल मेजॉरिटी करा फॉर नेशनल इमरजेंसी. राइट. देन 6 months का गैप करा. पहले नेशनल इमरजेंसी कुड बी इंडेफिनिट व्हेन इंदिरा गांधी हैड इम्पोज्ड इट. Okay, and if you want the emergency to be voted down, then you require quorum, which is 10% of the strength. Then if the high courts want to issue habeas corpus for arbitrary detention, then habeas corpus should be allowed. Then 2 महीने के अलावा डिटेंशन नहीं कर सकते, इसको फिर फाइनली नोटिफाई नहीं किया. एंड देन द मोस्ट रिमार्केबल चेंज वाज दैट 20 and 21 could not be suspended under any circumstances, and the Supreme Court review of the satisfaction of the president and everything else could be challenged. So ये basic changes हुए थे. ठीक है. I'll show you through a proper case study also. ठीक है. Issues क्या है? Armed rebellion have still not been defined. What is rebel? What is arm? What territorial area are we talking about? Second, written advice देने से additional safeguard कैसे हो रही है? Obviously, cabinet are going to be people who the prime minister loves, so they will anyways work together. They will not disagree with the PM. The PM will kick the person out from being the minister. Third, the parliament and the approval or the disapproval of the parliament is just a formality, because anti-defection law is still applicable to the Lok Sabha. And fourth, even if you can review the emergency, that does not really mean that this is effective enough. Sometimes the courts will also not want to get into it, right? तो भाई इसका हमारा solution क्या होना चाहिए? The solution that I have forgotten to write here is, your way forward should be that you must clearly define elements of emergency as much as possible. And second, if there could be a parliamentary committee who could then advise the cabinet on an emergency basis for emergency purposes, that should definitely be constituted. ये important बात है. ठीक है. Now, एक बार जो हमारी इमरजेंसी है उसको देख भी लेते हैं यार कि हुआ क्या था, राइट? सो दैट थिंग्स आर फार मोर रिलेटेबल. ओके, चलिए. द नेशनल इमरजेंसी ऑफ इंदिरा गांधी. ठीक है, चलिए. This is a broad timeline of events that have happened. Let's start and understand where it all began. The story starts from the 12th of June 1975, when the Allahabad High Court declared the election of Indira Gandhi, who she won against Raj Narayan, as invalid because she was accused of misusing government machinery for campaigning purposes. And not only was she disqualified, she was also banned from contesting the elections for 6 years, because if you can't be a PM, you can't be an MP. If you can't be an MP, you can't be a PM, so you'd be banned, right? A very, very courageous judge, if people have to say him to be. Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha was the one who delivered this judgment. Fair enough, Indira Gandhi took this judgment up to the Supreme Court, and within a few days went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court granted a conditional stay. कहा कि ठीक है, let us look into the matter. In the meantime, you will not vote in the parliament, Mrs. Gandhi. You will not speak in the parliament. You can continue to discharge your basic functions as the prime minister, but you will not act like a full-fledged MP, because, well, you are not a full-fledged MP. So we are treating you like a PM who has 6 months to, become an MP. So don't participate in the house. You can be present in the house, but don't participate in the house. And this, of course, is in fact. This, of course, in fact, is a huge embarrassment for Mrs. Indira Gandhi, if you think about it in a certain way. एक दिन में सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने स्टे दिया. एक दिन के अंदर the then President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad declared a state of national emergency a few minutes before midnight. This is actually the official proclamation order. In exercise of powers conferred under Clause 1 of Article 352, I, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, President of India, by this proclamation declare a grave emergency exists. उसके बाद तुम ऑर्डर पे ऑर्डर देते रहो, जैसे लॉकडाउन में नहीं देते थे ऑर्डर कि अच्छा अब ये बंद हो गया, ये खुल गया, ये बंद हो गया, ये खुल गया, वैसे ही होता है. These directives can keep coming later and later, but emergency लागू कर दी. डिटेल्स हम अभी थोड़ी देर में देख लेंगे, ठीक है. एंड देन a day later, of course, the cabinet sanctioned, कहा कि हाँ बहुत बढ़िया, बहुत बढ़िया. The cabinet was not even informed before. There were also several press restrictions in place. 4 दिन के अंदर मेंटेनेंस सिक्योरिटी मीसा, जो एक प्रिवेंटिव डिटेंशन लॉ है, उसको अमेंड करा गया, विच इज़ बेसिकली अ डिटेंशन ऑफ अ पर्सन अंडर विदाउट ट्रायल. ये आपके जितने भी है मुलायम सिंह, रामविलास पासवान, लालू प्रसाद यादव, नीतीश कुमार, ये सब के सब इमरजेंसी में जेल गए थे. That's why they're called the post-era socialist leaders. Not only this, but your Vajpayee, your Advani, Jaitley, सबके सब गए थे जेल. This MISA was basically a controversial law which was passed by the Indian Parliament in 71 under the administration of Gandhi, Mrs. Gandhi. Basically, the intelligence agencies, the police agencies had wide powers. Searches, seizures, wiretapping, कुछ भी करना हो to protect quote unquote national security. ठीक है. फिर इंदिरा गांधी ने शुरू करा द मास अपील प्रोग्राम, है ना. शी स्टार्टेड विद द 20-point PM प्रोग्राम विच वेंट ऑन टिल द अर्ली 2000s ऑल्सो बाय द वे. लैंड रिफॉर्म्स करेंगे, बिकॉज यूसी केशवानंदा भारती वगैरह से लैंड रिफॉर्म्स बहुत ज़्यादा रिस्ट्रिक्ट हो गए थे. हम एग्रीकल्चरल लेबर का इश्यूज फिक्स करेंगे, रोटी कपड़ा मकान ये सब वहाँ से आया हुआ है. एंड शी सेड कि मुझे ये करना पड़ा so that I can work for the people. Otherwise, these parties, these politics was not letting me work for the people. The rich, the corporates were the ones who were not, helping me get to my people who I owe my existence to. And of course, this program was further restructured in 1886 later, but this was the end. ये सुना नहीं लग रहा है. आजकल भी लोग ऐसे ही बोलते हैं, which is what I always say. इंसान बदलता है, समय बदलता है, बातें वही रहती है. Right? So if you're apolitical enough like me, you'll understand how there isn't a lot of difference in a lot of things that have been done in a lot of ways across the last 30-40 years dating today. Ab political crackdown. RSS, Jamaat-e-Islami, 26 political organizations were banned. आज भी काफ़ी organizations banned होती है. Law बदलता है लेकिन ban तो होती है. ठीक है. वहाँ मीसा था, यहाँ अनलॉफुल एक्टिविटीज़ प्रिवेंशन एक्ट है. वहाँ एग्रीकल्चरल रिफॉर्म्स था, यहाँ डीमोनेटाइजेशन है. राइट. यस. या. Jayaprakash Narayan, who was a very, very close aide of the Gandhi family, he was deeply moved by the emergency and the crackdown of it because of a student protest which was heavily, beaten down by the government in Gujarat. वो गुजरात की यूनिवर्सिटी के बेचारे बच्चों की कैंटीन की फीस बढ़ा दी. बच्चों ने प्रोटेस्ट करा तो बच्चों को पकड़ के मार दिया, which of course caused a lot of disappointment all across the country. This was the spark that was needed, and in Patna, the largest ever government rally, anti-government rally was organized. साहब को arrest करा गया, and then Jayaprakash Narayan, of course, is etched in history. RSS was the organization which worked underneath all of this. They suddenly became close to the opposition leaders. They started setting up underground networks. They participated in ground and underground movements. जो मीडिया में लिटरेचर बैन था वो RSS ने सर्कुलेट करना शुरू किया. ठीक है. All right. And then of course they became a very powerful organization. And the Economist magazine of that time defined the RSS Satyagrah movement as the only non-left revolutionary force in the world. Of course, it at that time has an objective of bringing democracy back to India. So RSS, of course, became what it is today. And today, of course, is a different ecosystem altogether. ठीक है. तो ये हुआ. फिर जुलाई 23 देखो, महीने भर के अंदर the राज्यसभा एंड द लोकसभा हैड वोटेड इन फेवर फॉर इट, पास कर दिया. जब वो एक बार इमरजेंसी पास हो गई तो फिर और भी लोगों को अरेस्ट करने शुरू कर दिए. ये उस टाइम के इंडियन हेरल्ड की क्लिपिंग है. फिर 6 महीने में, बिकॉज उस टाइम पे इंडेफिनिट होता था, ये 6 महीने का तो अभी लगाया है 1978 में. Then in 6 months, censorship Article 19 was completely suspended. Press rights were diminished. Courts could not report. Media could not report on court judgments. फिर उस टाइम तक 1976 में लोकसभा डिसॉल्व होने वाली थी, was extended by 1 year. It was done through a bill in the Lok Sabha. Bill was passed, कहा कि ज़रूरी है. Lok Sabha got extended till 1977. In the meantime, the rise of Sanjay Gandhi happens towards the end of 76. Forced sterilization happened. Males had to compulsorily undergo vasectomy. This was also to control population growth, but it is assumed that in 1960s, between 1976 to 1977, the program led to 8.3 million sterilizations, which were of course 4 times from the last year. ऐसे हुआ, इसमें मूवी भी बनी थी. फिर नवंबर में 42nd अमेंडमेंट भी पास कर दिया, पार्लियामेंट तो थी ही थी, प्रियम्बल ऐड कर दिया, फंडामेंटल ड्यूटीज़ ऐड हो गई. एंड फिर 18 जनवरी में, क्योंकि फरवरी में टर्म ख़त्म होने वाला था, फ्रेश लोकसभा इलेक्शंस वर अनाउंस्ड. वो मार्च में होने थे. धीरे धीरे पॉलिटिकल प्रिजनर्स को रिलीज़ करा. Emergency was officially ended in March 1977. Existing Lok Sabha was dissolved 20 में, क्योंकि फरवरी का टाइम आने वाला था. इलेक्शन शुरू हुए. Censorship of the press was lifted. फिर इलेक्शंस ख़त्म हुए. मोरारजी देसाई के थ्रू जनता पार्टी वन. मोरारजी देसाई, and then this Janata Party later on also gets converted to Bharatiya Janata Party. Vajpayee becomes its first elected president, right? But anyways, ये सब चलता रहा, शुरू रहा. And of course, Morarji Desai became the first non-Congress president. They won a total of 345 seats with allies. And of course, Morarji Desai became the first non-Congress prime minister. When these elections had happened, Congress got voted out of power. Janata Party within itself won 298 seats. The BJP this year won 303 in 2019, right? So of course 1976 में स्वतंत्रता पार्टी, जनसंघ सब खत्म हो गए थे. They barely won anything. February में the president Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad died. He was the second president after Zakir Hussain to have died in office. 21 March 21st तक emergency withdraw हुई. Lasted for almost 21 months. Its legacy still remains controversial. Why? Because of detention, torture, abuse of media, televisions, government-sponsored media, forced sterilization, destruction of low-income housing in Turkman Gate and the Jama Masjid area, कि आपको rehabilitate करेंगे, and a large-scale enactment of new laws and modifications to the Constitution. Morarji Desai finally became India's new Prime Minister. This is a photo of him taking an oath. And ladies and gentlemen, this is your emergency as it is. ठीक है? Clear? Yes, sort of. Choice of color was very deliberate. I was hoping nobody would get it, and then I would get away with an internal laugh. But sort of, Parashar, I'm extremely impressed by you. ठीक है? Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? Yes. तो हमारे भाई सेंटर स्टेट ख़त्म हो गया. Our center state relations are completely taken care of, entirely finished. We are sorted on that front. ठीक है? Clear? Understood? Thank you, Avnish. हाँ. चलिए. This is the forward. हाँ, SLAs can function. Yeah. Initially imposed, Kamluddin. Thanks, Ravnish. I'm really glad that you notice it. Perfect. You can take a 10-minute, actually take a 5 to 6 minutes break. रेवोकेशन प्रोसेस में क्या प्रॉब्लम है भाई? सेम मेजॉरिटी रिक्वायर्ड फॉर रेवोकेशन, या तो प्रेसिडेंट खुद ही विड्रॉ कर दे. No, 365 per se is not. It's too technical, yaar. Yes, Pankaj. सेंट्रल लॉबी की. अरे Saurav was talking about the color of the slide of RSS. हाँ. ये. Okay, take a 5-6 minutes break, please. Thank you. थैंक यू अश्विनी, थैंक यू. Ajal address that because it was a protectorate state. Thank you, Sharik. If nobody challenged it, thank you, Ankit. Yes, Madhurima, I'll address that. Okay. Thank you. चलिए भाई शुरू करते हैं. थैंक यू मिथिलेश, थैंक यू. अब वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट सरपंच एंड म्युनिसिपैलिटी. Local self-government, that's our second last theme, and bodies are very simple. Anyways, local self-government, ठीक है. Layer 1, conceptual and factual, and therefore important for the prelims. You need to know your conceptual background of democratic decentralization, and second, you need to know your basic provisions of the 73rd and the 74th Amendment Act, and basic provisions of the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Areas Act of the 1990s. We'll come to that. Way forward of emergency is nothing but way forward in the sense that it was done for the wrong, is heavily criticized because of how undemocratic institutions were. Layer 2 is a very simple 360-degree analysis of the different components of local self-government. Standard question होता है, last year नहीं आया था. I'm heavily expecting in 2022 to have a question here. Now, before we start with local self-government, which honestly is a very simple topic, you may also remember that we had done a layout of the Indian state in our very first classes in theme 1, जहाँ मैंने आपको लोकल में डिस्ट्रिक्ट, सब डिविजन, ब्लॉक, विलेज का एक स्ट्रक्चर दिखाया था इनिशियली. वी आर गोइंग टू इसेंशियली बी बिल्डिंग ऑन दैट स्ट्रक्चर इटसेल्फ व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट. The one request I have from you when we study local self government is, मेरे को ये क्वेश्चन नहीं आना चाहिए, सर मेरे स्टेट में, मेरे गांव में, मेरे विलेज में, मेरा सिटी में ऐसा होता है. बॉस, this is highly customizable to the states, highly customizable to the states, so don't worry too much about it. ठीक है, it's highly customizable to the states, so don't worry about it. We only need to know the basic common provisions here. ठीक है, तो शुरू करते हैं. See, to understand this, we must understand that the center and the states are nothing but indirect democracies wherein there are essentially representatives of citizens, and there has to be a relationship of trust between the representative and the citizen. But the citizen is not directly involved in taking decisions in the community where the citizen lives. That is why the next step is to come up with empowering citizens locally. To empower citizens locally. अब पावर वही है ना, पावर इज लेजिस्लेटिव पावर, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव पावर एंड फाइनेंशियल पावर. हमको ये पावर सिटीजन्स को देनी है, राइट. द बेस्ट वे टू अंडरस्टैंड दिस इज, ऑल ऑफ यू वुड हैव हर्ड ऑफ हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज इन इंडिया. एक सोसाइटी होती है इतनी बड़ी सी, उसमें टावर 1, टावर 2, टावर 3, टावर 4, टावर 5, टावर 6 है ना, यहाँ पे लोग रहते हैं. एंड ऑल ऑफ दीज आर मेंबर्स ऑफ अ सोसाइटी. These members choose a management committee of the society and then collectively they govern the society, है ना. कि हमारे सोसाइटी में अमेज़ॉन वाला घर आएगा या गेट पे छोड़ेगा, आप डॉग को यहाँ घुमा सकते हैं, यहाँ नहीं घुमा सकते हैं, यहाँ नहीं घुमा सकते हैं. ऑल ऑफ दीज आर एब्सोल्यूट हिपोक्रेट्स। सोसाइटी के बाहर जाके कचरा फेंकेंगे, लेकिन अगर कोई सोसाइटी में कचरा फेंके तो फोटो खींच के व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप में डालेंगे। एंड दे आर पर्टिकुलरली बायस्ड टू ऑल ऑफ अस हु आर टेनेंट्स। हम रेंट देते हैं, तो उसमें क्या होता है कि रेंट देते हैं हम, तो हम वी आर लेसर ह्यूमन बींग्स। सो दे विल से बैचलर्स कैन नॉट हैव डॉग्स, नाउ आई हैव डॉग्स। वो कहते हैं कि डॉग नहीं होना चाहिए, तो मैं बोला कानून कैसे कैसे बोल दिया ये आपने, अंडरस्टूड दिस राइट? थैंक्स एंजल। सो दैट इज द बेसिक इशू। यही है लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट, कि हम डिसाइड करेंगे हमारी सोसाइटी में क्या होगा, बस, और कुछ। दिस इज बेसिकली what is called local self-government, and it is based on 3 principles, 3 D's, D, 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 D. First D stands for delegation. The second D stands for decentralization, okay? And the third D stands for devolution. The third D stands for devolution. ठीक है? Now, delegation is the transfer of administrative power. Decentralization is the transfer of administrative and financial power. And devolution is the transfer of administrative power, financial powers, and legislative powers. And if legislative powers have been transferred, then automatically all other powers have been transferred. हमारा सपना devolution है, हमारी हकीकत decentralization है. Our dream is devolution, but our reality is decentralization. This is exactly local self-government. Why is our reality decentralization? Our reality is decentralization because local self-government as a subject is in the state list. And because you're creating a new layer of government, you will have to dignify it with a constitutional amendment and mention it. But the constitutional amendment has to be in such a way that it does not take away the powers of the states. And keeping this in mind, we designed what is called the 73rd and the 74th amendment. We're going local. 73rd is rural, 74th is urban. They add new parts and articles to the constitution, and they have 2 kinds of provisions: compulsory provisions and voluntary provisions. Voluntary provisions is where you look at giving power. Compulsory provisions is about structure. Structure is compulsory कि भाई ये तो होगा, and power is voluntary. अब you have to give them the powers to make laws, right? You have to give them the powers to make laws. Now, how do you give the powers to make laws? We will have to take powers away from the 7th schedule and create the 11th and the 12th schedule, and this also has to be voluntary. This also has to be voluntary. तो बेसिकली कहने का मतलब ये है कि हर स्टेट में सरपंच 100% होगा, but how powerful the sarpanch will depend on the state because it is in the state list. तो सारी कहानी यही है. Are you implementing these properly? How much are you implementing here? The transfer of legislative power is devolution. Structure is decentralization. That is why local self-government is called democratic decentralization. ठीक है? That is why it is called democratic decentralization. And in your drives itself, I have already shared a very easy structure for it, and then we'll do the mains part in it also in just a bit. ठीक है? तो ड्राइव में जाएंगे, पॉलिटी नोट्स में जाएंगे, हम मेन पेज में रहेंगे. विल कीप स्क्रॉलिंग. आपको यहाँ पे हैंड रिटन नोट सेंटर स्टेट में उसके मिल जाएंगे लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट के. ठीक है. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you the basics of it. Mains notes में जाएंगे, updated notes में जाएंगे, आप फाइल नंबर 2 खोलेंगे, आपको आराम से सब कुछ मिल जाएगा. ठीक है. So let's get into the technicalities of it. Let's understand how all of this functions. ठीक है. So the 73rd constitutional amendment adds part 9A and has articles 243 to 243O and is supplemented by the 11th schedule. The 73rd constitutional amendment adds part 9B and is supported by the 12th schedule. बस इतना सा 9 and 9A. ठीक है, बस इतना आसान है. ये दोनों वॉलंटरी हैं. अब मैंने एक जगह सारे इसके पॉइंट्स ऑलरेडी लिख रखे हैं. ठीक है, लेट्स गेट डाउन टू बिजनेस. ठीक है, बहुत आसान है, कोई टेंशन ही नहीं लेना है. चलो, ऑल राइट. सो लेट्स फर्स्ट स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द हिस्ट्री, अगर आपको एस्से वगैरह में लिखना पड़े. सो द हिस्ट्री ऑफ लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट is as old as the Rigvedic period, where you had some local powers to local functions. Then in the medieval period, where the panchayati system had deteriorated because of the increase in zamindari system. Then after the Mughal era, because of excessive land ownership and all of that, Kotwali system was introduced, so democratization thoda kam ho gaya. British, of course, never wanted any power to be decentralized, so it became further more diluted. Then the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919 post the First World War, of course, further weakened the powers that had to be given to the local elected representatives. There were 2 separate lists that were created for governor and elected representatives, and there were lesser powers given. And then by 1935, all the powers were eventually sort of taken back by the Government of India Act of 1935. ये इससे वगैरह में काम आएगा, GS में नहीं आएगा. ठीक है. अब देखो, पोस्ट 1947 कहानी कहाँ से शुरू हुई. सी, first things first, promotion of village panchayats is in the directive principles of state policy and of course is Gandhian in nature. Gandhian in nature. अरे अंकित, thanks. ठीक है, is Gandhian in nature. We set up several committees. बलवंत राय कमेटी 1957 which said basic administration होना चाहिए. संथम in 1963, इससे ज़्यादा प्लीज़ मत करना, एग्जाम में नहीं आता है. ठीक है. दैट पंचायती इंस्टीट्यूशन शुड बी गिवन द पावर्स टू लेवी टैक्स. देन अ मेजर कमिटी कॉल्ड द अशोक मेहता कमिटी in 1976 said there should be a 2-tier setup. One should be at the block level, the other should be at the one should be at the mandal level and one should be at the zilla level. Then the GVK committee in 1985, which advocated for a 3-tier system, which was then finally accepted. And Singhvi committee in 1986 said you should make a constitutional amendment around it. Singhvi was of course a constitutional expert himself. So this is how the evolution happened. अब देखो, ये है आपका basic system. Local self government has 3 tiers: ग्राम सभा, पंचायत समिति, जिला परिषद. And urban has 2 tiers: ward and, depending on the area, municipality, municipal council और corporation. ये district है, ये district है, ये block है, ये village है, ये village equivalent है और ये district है. This depends on the size of the urban area, so municipality, council और corporation. ठीक है. Now you have some compulsory provisions. What are your compulsory provisions? Your compulsory provisions are rural के लिए 3 tier, urban के लिए 2 tier. Minimum age for voting is 18 years and everybody who is a village resident and above 18 years of age is automatically a member of the Gram Sabha. हाँ, पार्लियामेंट ही तो बना रहे हैं. The only difference is this is your only functional tool of direct democracy, which we have discussed in our earlier classes, theme 1, layout of the state, if you may recollect by some stretch of imagination. ठीक है, अगर आप गांव में रहते हैं, आप 18 साल के ऊपर हैं, तो भाई आप ऑटोमेटिकली ग्राम सभा के मेंबर हैं. पीएम को बोलेंगे सरपंच, अगर बड़ा गांव है तो काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स को बोलेंगे पंचायत. यहाँ शहर है तो अंग्रेजी में बोलेंगे चेयरपर्सन, बस, और कोई फर्क नहीं है. ठीक है. Then of course minimum age for contesting elections is 21 years. 1/3 of the seats have to be reserved for women at all levels. मतलब 1/3 of all sarpanches will be women. 1/3 of panchayat, if the village has a panchayat, will be women. 1/3 of all heads of panchayat samiti will be women. 1/3 of all heads of zilla parishad will be women. ठीक है. And if you have a zilla parishad council, then 1/3 there also. Panchayat Samiti also, so council also, so 1/3 there also. Depending on the population, you will also designate certain villages, blocks and districts as SC/ST category. OBC अगर state करना चाहे तो, और ये overlap हो सकता है. So you can have a village which is declared as a women SC village, so the sarpanch will only be a woman and from the SC category. And apart from this, there will be two bodies, the State Election Commission and the State Finance Commission, who will do the jobs. क्या? State Election will conduct elections to local self-government, and State Finance Commission will recommend to the state the distribution of taxes between the states and local self-government. These are basically regional variations of the existing authorities. ठीक है. These are various existing versions of existing authority. देखो मैंने क्या मना करा था अभिषेक वैष्णव, पर जिला प्रमुख एंड जिला परिषद आर द सेम. समझ में आया? मैं एक चीज मना करा था करने के लिए, वही बच्चों को ना नहीं बर्दाश्त ही नहीं होता है. दे आर द सेम बाय द वे. ठीक है. आर वी क्लियर ऑन दिस? डू वी अंडरस्टैंड दिस? ये बेसिक है, इतना तो करना ही करना है. इसके ऊपर आपको जो करना है करो. ओबीसी रिजर्वेशन देना है, डिवॉल्व करना है, जो करना है करो. ये बेयर मिनिमम इतना होना चाहिए बस. यहाँ पे इलेक्शन डायरेक्ट होगा इनडायरेक्ट होगा आप देख लो, वहाँ डायरेक्ट होगा इनडायरेक्ट होगा आप देख लो. सपोज ये भी तो पार्लियामेंट है. नाउ लेट अस से काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स है, सो काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स हैव टू एंजॉय मेजॉरिटी. अब पंचायत में आप भी तो नो कॉन्फिडेंस मोशन कर सकते हो. सपोज आपने पंचायत बोला नो कॉन्फिडेंस मोशन पास कर दिया, देन the new panchayat will be for the remainder of the years. अगर 5 साल का है, 2 साल में नो कॉन्फिडेंस हुआ, तो जो नई पंचायत आएगी वो 3 साल के लिए आएगी. लोकसभा में ऐसा नहीं होता. जो नहीं आती वो अगले 5 साल के लिए आती है. Why? Because you have a direct democracy and the village, the electorate is not changing. विलेज कहीं नहीं बदल रहा है, इसलिए विलेज थोड़ी ना बदल दोगे कि गांव से लोगों को ही हटा दिया. ठीक है. So this of course is your basic understanding of things. Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? ये समझ में आ रहा है? These are your basic provisions. ठीक है. Basic provisions ये compulsory है, ये करने ही करने हैं, चाहे कुछ हो जाए, चाहे दुनिया इधर की उधर हो जाए. प्री में क्वेश्चंस यहीं से आते हैं. Basic questions from the pre are from here. ठीक है. Basic questions. ठीक है. 3 tier, 2 tier, minimum voting age 18, minimum election contesting age 21, एंड देन उसके ऊपर आपको एजुकेशन रिजर्वेशन देना है. राजस्थान ने कोशिश करा था दैट सरपंच शुड बी 6th पास, पंचायत समिति हेड शुड बी 8th पास, डिस्ट्रिक्ट हेड शुड बी 10th पास. तो ये नहीं चलेगा. ठीक है. क्लियर? ये आपको लोकली जो करना है करो, उससे हमको कोई लेना देना नहीं. कंपल्सरी प्रोविजंस ये है, एंड राजस्थान ऑफ कोर्स हैड विड्रॉन इट बिकॉज ऑफ लिटरेसी कंसर्न्स. ठीक है. So this is your basic compulsory provision for local self government. ठीक है. This is your actual structure जो मैंने आपको from the पंचायत दिखा दिया है. विलेज, ब्लॉक, सब डिविजन, डिस्ट्रिक्ट. सब डिविजन में कुछ नहीं होता. ग्राम सभा का पीएम, काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स, ये हम ऑलरेडी कर चुके हैं. This is just to give you a layout of the local administration here. ठीक है. जस्ट अ लेआउट ऑफ द लोकल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है और कुछ नहीं है. ये गांव की पार्लियामेंट है, ये ब्लॉक की पार्लियामेंट है, सॉरी ये गांव की पार्लियामेंट है, ये ब्लॉक की पार्लियामेंट है, ये डिस्ट्रिक्ट की पार्लियामेंट है, बस और कुछ नहीं। कौन कितना किसको पावर देता है वो भी हम एनालिसिस में कर लेंगे, बट दिस इज मोर देन इनफ। मैं आई शो यू सम प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चंस आल्सो, हो जाएंगे इससे, ठीक है, डन। नाउ if you get a question on the analysis of पंचायती राज, you will only get it on these 7 questions। 7 सवाल आते हैं। पहला, इलेक्शन टाइम पे हो रहे हैं, पैसा दिया कि नहीं दिया, लोग और पावर दिया कि नहीं दिया, डिस्ट्रिक्ट प्लानिंग कमिटीज सपोज टू बी कंजॉइंट बिटवीन द एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एंड द इलेक्टेड बॉडीज, ये कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, ग्राम सभा कितना फंक्शनल है कि नहीं, द पंचायत एक्सटेंशन शेड्यूल्ड एक्ट विच हैज टू अप्लाई इन 8 स्टेट्स, वो ठीक से लग रहा है कि नहीं, एंड चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेज ओवर देयर फंक्शन, ये है कि नहीं, ठीक है। द इंडियन पंचायती राज सिस्टम एज द और द इंडियन लोकल गवर्नमेंट सिस्टम इज इन फैक्ट is by I mean very easily is in fact you will not believe is the largest panchayati raj system in the world, the largest, ठीक है। Now let's understand पैसा कैसे देते हैं कैसे नहीं देते हैं। This is all dependent on the State Finance Commission, very similar to the Finance Commission of India. So assignment of taxes, duties, levies etc. to local bodies, जैसे होता है ना, आप मैक्लोइडगंज से पालमपुर जाओगे तो वो टोल में खड़े रह के आपको 20 रुपए देंगे, दैट्स अ लोकल पंचायत टैक्स दैट यू हैव टू पे। शेयरिंग ऑफ रेवेन्यू प्रोसीड्स, transfer of accounts of grants and aid from the state governments to the panchayats. Now many of the state governments have agreed to give PRIs a specific percentage, a very clear and a very specific percentage of share in some of the state taxes like land revenue, cess, additional stamp duty, entertainment test, royalties on mines and minerals, forest revenue, market fees, ये सब कहा है कि आप ये सब कर सकते हैं। Now the problem is these are very buoyant in nature, इससे आपका पावर से कोई लेना देना नहीं है, यहाँ आपको टैक्स का बस एक हिस्सा मिलेगा। You will not get the powers to tax on stamp duty. स्टैम्प ड्यूटी जितनी लोकल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन कलेक्ट कर रहा है उसमें से थोड़ा आपको दे देंगे, दैट इज इट। एंड all state finance commissions have now started putting emphasis on what is called internal revenue mechanism or internal revenue mobilization। मतलब पंचायत भी तो रेवेन्यू जनरेट करके दे हमको, so that we are also able to keep it a two-way process. But none of the state finance commissions have told us exactly how this works and how all of this has to eventually be achieved. Now, however, the state finance commissions have suggested that the better usage of tax jurisdiction होना चाहिए। प्रॉपर्टी टैक्सेस के लिए लोकल के लिए पावर दो, आप लोकल फीस लोकल फाइन्स कलेक्ट करने की पावर दो, सो दैट दे आर ऑल्सो एबल टू बी सस्टेनेबली सॉर्ट ऑफ बॉयंट। सपना ये है कि एमजी नरेगा का पैसा सीधा सरपंच के पास पहुंचे, सरपंच सिट्स विद द ग्राम सभा, डिसाइड्स कि क्या काम करवाना है, काम करवाया, लोगों को एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी दी, एंड द ब्यूरोक्रेसी सॉर्ट ऑफ बिकम्स ए फैसिलिटेटर। Today the sarpanch goes with folded hands to the bureaucracy. Tomorrow the bureaucracy should come with folded hands to the sarpanch. ये आप लोग होने नहीं देंगे क्योंकि इतनी मेहनत करके आपने यूपीएससी क्लियर किस लिए किया है फिर, है ना। तो ये बेसिक पॉइंट तो है ही है, ठीक है। Now till the time they become financially dependent and all of that, state budget should very clearly give district wise plans कि हाँ लोकल के लिए सरपंच के लिए इतना पैसा, ब्लॉक के लिए इतना पैसा, जिला के लिए इतना पैसा। एंड दे ऑल्सो सेड दैट 30 to 40% ऑफ द स्टेट प्लान विल बी डिवॉल्व्ड ऑन लोकल बॉडीज एज ऑलरेडी डन इन द स्टेट ऑफ केरला, जैसे केरला में होता है। In addition to this, a part of the finances should be in form of untied funds so that the funds can be utilized as per the felt needs of the पंचायत। मतलब कम से कम आप उनको फ्री फंड्स दो कि उनको जो करना है इस पैसे का वो करें। एंड अगर IAS IPS और स्टेट सर्विसेज की ट्रेनिंग हो सकती है, MP MLA की हो सकती है, तो सरपंच और उनके स्टाफ की क्यों नहीं हो सकती है, right? Similarly, when we look at devolution of functions and functionaries, we must understand MP Kerala have done extraordinary work wherein they've actually started giving more and more decision making powers to the local authorities. देखो 11th schedule में 29 subjects है, sanitation, water, health, ऐसे करके कोशिश करो जितना दे सकते हो दे दो. The reality in India is no state, and I mean no state in India, has transferred all 29 subjects as they are, all 29 subjects in their entire capacities to the local bodies. किसी ने भी all 29 सब्जेक्ट्स अभी तक नहीं दिए हैं, ठीक है. एंड नाउ यू मस्ट अंडरस्टैंड, बना तो दिया बट इनको रेलेवेंट कैसे बनाएंगे. रेलेवेंट बनाने के लिए वी नीड टू स्टार्ट मेकिंग देम इंडिपेंडेंट बॉडीज. अब क्या होता है कि लोकल में जल बोर्ड है, डीडीए है, डेवलपमेंट अथॉरिटी है, यू हैव योर आंगनवाड़ीज, योर एसएचजीज, योर लोकल डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, फिर स्कीम्स के लिए स्पेशल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस बन जाती है, ठीक है. तो फिर unfortunately this does not really work in the area that it should have. उनको आप खाली छोड़ देते हो बिना किसी काम के. And at the end of the day, the appointment of the commissioner by the state इन द म्यूनिसिपल बॉडीज़ एंड ग्राम सेवक, उससे क्या होता है कि जब म्यूनिसिपल के हेड्स हैं, ग्राम सेवक अपने आप को आपने ब्यूरोक्रेसी बिठा दी, तो वो बेचारा सरपंच, मेयर, पंचायत समिति वाला करे तो क्या करे, राइट. एंड एट द एंड ऑफ द डे जो लोकल इश्यूज है उससे डील करने के लिए आपने उनको क्या सिखाया है. डिजास्टर, पेंडेमिक, लोकल डिजीजेस, suburban sprawl, demographic dividend, बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं जो बहुत रियल हैं and they should be solved as early and as immediately as possible, ठीक है. Then district planning committees, which are jointly to be comprised of the elected and the bureaucracy at the local level and elected across both urban and rural, ये बनाना चाहिए. बहुत स्टेट्स ने अभी तक किया ही नहीं है. इतने स्टेट्स हैं उसमें से 9 स्टेट्स ने ही किया है, और हरियाणा ने भी पूरे स्टेट में नहीं किया है, सिर्फ 3 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में किया है. कर्नाटका ने 27 में से 10 में किया है. केरला, मध्य प्रदेश, राजस्थान, सिक्किम, तमिलनाडु, all of them are not taken full DPC sort of compositions. Kerala although has done something very interesting. They have set up what is called a VTC, एक local administrative, एक local voluntary workforce बनाई है, जिसमें anybody with formal education can work with the panchayats, help them figure out their plan. अब पंचायत बोलता है कि मेरे को यहाँ ट्यूबवेल बनाना है, अब वो ट्यूबवेल की फीजिबिलिटी चेक करने में 5 साल लग जाते हैं डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को. सो इफ यू हैव अ लोकल बॉडी हु कैन असिस्ट यू विद दिस, कैन गिव यू द राइट टेक्निकल एडवाइस, इट कैन गेट योर वर्क कैन गेट डन, you can truly get done faster. So this is your constitution of district planning committees. अब ग्राम सभा का क्या प्रॉब्लम है, इसको कैसे सॉल्व कर सकते हैं. देखिए, none of the state panchayat acts and the states have the powers to make local acts because local है तो state list में, as long as it's in conformity with your compulsory provisions. ग्राम सभा की एग्जैक्ट पावर क्या होनी चाहिए किसी को नहीं पता है. जैसे इन मोस्ट स्टेट्स का है कि ग्राम सभा को कम से कम 2 बार मिलना चाहिए. अब वो कम से कम को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा मान लिया है कि मैक्सिमम 2 ही बार मिलेंगे. कि जैसे पार्लियामेंट और लेजिस्लेचर में होता है एटलीस्ट 10% इज देयर. अब गांव में भी तो कोरम तो कि 3 लोग पंचायत है और 1 सरपंच है, 4 लोग बैठ के सब डिसाइड कर लेते हैं. ऐसे थोड़ी ना चलेगा, ऐसे कैसे किसी को क्लैरिटी मिलेगा, ठीक है. एंड ऑफ कोर्स ग्राम सभा देन बिकम कि अच्छा अवार्ड दे रहे हैं, पूजा करवा रहे हैं, फेस्टिवल बना रहे हैं, ये सब थोड़ी ना होता है. एंड ग्राम सभा आर सपोज टू रेकमेंड कि भाई सोशल ऑडिट कौन करेगा, ग्राम सभा ही तो करेगा. एंड दीज रिकमेंडेशंस मस्ट बी देन accepted by the panchayat or the sarpanch and given to the district administration. प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है ग्राम सभा में, कई बार इन वेरी रिमोट एरियाज सम 5-6 villages आर कंसिडर्ड एज 1 ग्राम सभा. तो उसमें फिर पंचायत मिलती साल में एक बार है बिकॉज द विलेजेस आर वेरी फार, एंड दैट इज समथिंग दैट वी ऑफन डील विद एज अ रियल चैलेंज. फिर आता है पीसा. अब पीसा क्या है? Panchayat Extension Scheduled Areas Act 1996 was enacted after the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. ये आंध्रा, बिहार, गुजरात, हिमाचल, महाराष्ट्र, मध्य प्रदेश, उड़ीसा एंड राजस्थान, इनके ट्राइबल एरियाज में लगता है, पूरे स्टेट्स में नहीं. Because the government has special powers to make special provisions for this, center stronger than the states. बेसिक फंडा ये है कि यहाँ पे जितने ट्राइबल्स हैं उनको लोकल रिसोर्सेज पे ज़्यादा पावर्स हैं. इट्स बेसिकली ग्राम सभा plus Chemical X is Panchayat Extension Act of 1996 and it gives radical governance powers to the tribal community and recognizes कि भाई मेरे एरिया का मिनरल रिसोर्स है, इसको एक्सट्रैक्ट मैं करूँगा और मेरे एक्सट्रैक्ट करने के बाद मैं इसको अच्छे से अपने लिए यूज़ करूँगा. दैट्स द बेसिक फैक्ट, राइट. सो यू हैव सम बेसिक प्रोविजन सच एज लोकल डेवलपमेंट प्लान्स है, वहाँ पे माइनिंग होनी है, सोशल सेक्टर्स की कोई स्कीम्स है, माइनर फॉरेस्ट रिसोर्सेज, माइनर मिनरल्स का जो ओनरशिप है, टिम्बर रिसोर्सेज का जो ओनरशिप है, वो उनके बिना नहीं कर सकते. माइंस एंड मिनरल्स एक्ट हैज अ मेजर प्रोड्यूस माइनर प्रोड्यूस लिस्ट. माइनर प्रोड्यूस वाली चीज़ें आप इनसे बिना नहीं निकाल सकते. हाँ, यूरेनियम निकालना है तो निकाल लो, कुछ नहीं बोलेंगे, उनको बोलने का पावर भी नहीं है. अंडरस्टूड. सो दिस इज कॉल्ड योर पंचायत एक्सटेंशन एक्ट. ये बेसिक्स है. मेंस में ये नहीं आता है, ये प्री में आता है. दिस इज मोर देन इनफ. इस फीचर से आप प्री के क्वेश्चन निकाल ले जाओगे. अब इश्यूज क्या है? इश्यूज है ऑफ कोर्स दैट यू हैवंट बीन एबल टू. देखो, पावर लाइक लॉ इज वेरी फाइनाइट. You have to reduce powers from somewhere to give powers to somewhere else. प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है कि जब आप पीसा इन्फोर्स करने जाते हो, आप कहते हो लोकल अथॉरिटी का परमिशन लगेगा फॉरेस्ट के काम में, टिम्बर के काम में, नॉन मेजर मिनरल्स के काम में. इतनी मेहनत करके फॉरेस्ट सर्विसेज में लोग जाते हैं, उनको बुरा लगता है, उनको लगता है कि ये क्या ज़रूरत है. एंड ऑफ कोर्स द ब्यूरोक्रेसी विल बी द बिगेस्ट इशू इन ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स. एंड इन ऑल ऑफ दीज स्टेट्स अब इसमें लैंड एक्विजिशन, एक्साइज, इरिगेशन, फॉरेस्ट प्रोड्यूस, माइनर मिनरल्स, इन सब में आपको चेंजेस करने पड़ेंगे. जब तक आप वो नहीं करोगे एंड यू विल नॉट रिकग्नाइज दीज चेंजेस इन योर प्राइमरी लॉज, देयर विल ऑलवेज बी अ स्कोप ऑफ कंफ्यूजन कि कौन सा कानून लगाएं, कौन सा कानून नहीं लगाएं, कब लगाना चाहिए, कब नहीं लगाना चाहिए. ये सारी के सारी इश्यूज तो हमेशा रहेंगे ही रहेंगे. सो आर वी क्लियर ऑन दिस? डू वी अंडरस्टैंड दिस? यस. एंड देन द लास्ट इशू इज कि इनको भी कंट्रोल में कैसे रखें, राइट. द क्वेश्चन इज, सी, the problem is most of the states have given the powers to the bureaucracy. आपको पता है जब कोई पंचायत डिसॉल्व हो जाती है, वहाँ नोट कॉन्फिडेंस हो जाता है, तो आप एसडीएम को पंचायत बना देते हो. एसडीएम अपॉइंटेड है भाई, आप बन जाते हो अपॉइंट पंचायत. दैट इज अ वायलेशन ऑफ डेमोक्रेटिक मैंडेट रूल 101. मेरे से बर्दाश्त ही नहीं होता ये सब, ठीक है. एंड another what happens is because of this the bureaucracy becomes the maibap of the panchayats and appointed authority becomes the maibap of an elected authority. The other issue is that your district rural development agencies, who are supposed to again be collaborative units, are now supposed to function in injunction to Zilla Parishad, right. अब इसको रिस्ट्रक्चर करना चाहिए था 73rd अमेंडमेंट के बाद, वो किया नहीं है. अब वो पैरेलल हो गया कि डिस्ट्रिक्ट में डीएम भी है, एसपी भी है, डीआरडीए भी है, डिस्ट्रिक्ट प्लानिंग कमेटी भी है, जिला परिषद भी है, म्यूनिसिपैलिटी भी है. अब सब लड़ रहे हैं कि मुझे क्या करना है, मुझे क्या नहीं करना है, राइट. एंड देयरफॉर दिस बिकम्स अ वेरी प्रॉब्लमेटिक प्रोसेस. उसके अलावा क्या होता है, वो बेचारे सरपंच 6-6 घंटे जाते हैं एसडीएम आपसे मिलने के लिए, आप टाइम ही नहीं देते. आप कहते हो आप कौन हो, राइट. And within the system also, the Gram Sabha, the blocks and the Zilla Parishads, they are competing for the Panchayat Samiti and Zilla Parishad, they are also competing. अब उसमें सबसे कम पैसा किसको मिलता है? ग्राम सभा को मिलता है. सारा पैसा ऊपर वाले ले लेते हैं. And that's where real development is required. If all of this is about local development, then the local authority should get the money for it. वो हो नहीं पाता है. And of course, a massive awareness generation program needs to be taken up to inform द ग्राम सभाज की भाई ये आपका राइट है, ये आप कर सकते हैं, ये आपको करना चाहिए, ये आप नहीं करते हो. एंड देयरफॉर योर फाइनल वे फॉरवर्ड शुड बी कि भाई आपका फंड्स ठीक से यूज़ हों. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंटली आपके जो कोर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट्स है उस पे ग्राम सभा का रोल रहे. देन यू शुड स्टार्ट यूजिंग द पंचायत्स इन द लोकल एम्प्लॉयमेंट प्रोग्राम्स. कोविड में दे हैव डन सच अ गुड वर्क. राष्ट्रीय ग्राम स्वराज अभियान which was launched was to strengthen the panchayati raj institutions. Emphasis must be given to make sure that they are learning better. E-governance होना चाहिए. And then of course you have some direct examples that you can give. उड़ीसा, छत्तीसगढ़ में इन्होंने राशंस पहुंचाए हैं, कम्युनिटी किचन्स बने हैं, में छत्तीसगढ़ के कंकेर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में लोकली वेजिटेबल्स बना दिए. देन ग्राम पंचायत और हेल्पिंग इन ट्रांजिशन ऑफ माइग्रेंट्स. इन अ लॉट ऑफ सिटीज म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशंस वर रनिंग वेजिटेबल्स ऑन व्हील्स. अंडरस्टूड, राइट? यस, वेरी गुड अभिषेक. ठीक है, क्लियर? हाँ बिल्कुल. अब समझ में आया? ये आपका बेसिक है. इसके ऊपर ना कुछ आएगा, ना प्री में ना मेंस में. इसके ऊपर आपको कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. ठीक है, अंडरस्टूड? ऑल राइट. नाउ 1 सेकेंड.